Most people live their entire lives without ever questioning whether the life they are living is the life they actually chose. They wake each morning to obligations they did not consciously select. They spend their days following routines they never deliberately designed. They pursue goals they inherited rather than goals they examined. And they move through years, sometimes decades, in patterns so automatic, so deeply ingrained, that they never stop to ask, is this what I want? Is this who I intended to become? Is this the life I would build if I were building it consciously? And for most people, the answer to these questions, if they ever asked them, would be no. But they do not ask. They simply continue. They accept the life that formed around them as if it were the only life possible. As if the circumstances they inherited, the conditioning they absorbed, the expectations placed upon them, as if all of this were fixed, unchangeable, the way things are and must remain. And I have spent decades observing human behavior, watching how lives unfold, examining what separates those who change from those who remain unchanged. And what I have discovered is both simple and profound. Life can be changed, not through wishing, not through hoping, not through waiting for circumstances to improve, but through understanding, through recognizing that life follows laws, that results are not random, that circumstances are not accidents, that the life you are living right now, whatever its condition, is the outward expression of inner causes you have been practicing, and those causes, those patterns of thought and behavior that produced your current circumstances, they can be identified, they can be understood, and they can be changed. And when they change, when you change the causes, the effects must change, not immediately, not magically, but lawfully, progressively, until the life you are living reflects the understanding you have practiced into existence. But most people never make this discovery. They never learn that change is possible. They never understand that the laws governing human life are as reliable as the laws governing the physical world. They see their circumstances as something that happened to them, as a result of forces beyond their control, as luck, good or bad, as timing, favorable or unfavorable, as other people's actions or inactions. And because they see it this way, because they attribute their circumstances to external causes, they never examine internal causes. They never look at their own thinking, their own beliefs, their own habitual patterns of response, and so they never change those patterns. And because the patterns remain unchanged, the circumstances remain unchanged, and they spend their entire lives producing the same results while hoping for different ones. And this is the condition I want to address, not to criticize, not to judge, but to clarify. Because if you understand that your life is the result of causes you have been practicing, if you see that changing your life means changing those causes, if you recognize that the laws governing this change are reliable and available to anyone willing to apply them, then change stops being a hope and becomes a certainty. Not a certainty of timing, not a certainty of specific outcomes, but a certainty of direction. A certainty that applying correct principles consistently over time must produce different results, must change circumstances, must transform the life you are living into the life you consciously choose to build. And what I mean by living by default, by accepting life without question, is this. From the moment you are born, you are being conditioned. You are absorbing beliefs from your family, expectations from your community, standards from your culture, and most of this absorption happens unconsciously. You do not choose what to believe about money. You absorb beliefs about money from those around you. You do not choose what to believe about success. You absorb definitions of success from your environment. You do not choose what to believe about yourself, about your capabilities, about what is possible for someone like you. You absorb all of this. And by the time you are old enough to question these beliefs, they are so deeply embedded, so automatic, that they feel like truth rather than conditioning. They feel like reality rather than interpretation. And so you never question them. You simply live according to them. And those unquestioned beliefs, those inherited patterns, they determine what you attempt, what you avoid, what you expect, what you accept. They shape your entire life. And you never realize that you are living according to programming you did not choose. And this programming, this conditioning, it operates through several mechanisms. First, through imitation. You watch how the people around you live and you imitate them. Not consciously, not deliberately, but automatically. You see how your parents handle money and you develop similar patterns. You see how people in your community pursue work, and you pursue work similarly. You observe what is considered success, and you aim for similar markers. And this imitation feels natural. It feels like common sense, but it is not common sense. It is conditioning. It is absorbing patterns from your environment and repeating them without examination. And if those patterns are productive, if the people you are imitating have built lives worth imitating, this serves you well. But if those patterns are unproductive, if the people around you are struggling, if their beliefs about what is possible are limited, then your imitation of those patterns will produce similar struggle, similar limitation, and you will spend your life wondering why success is difficult, while never realizing that you are practicing patterns designed to produce difficulty. Second, through repetition. Whatever you repeat becomes automatic. Whatever you practice regularly becomes habit, and habits operate beneath conscious awareness. They run automatically. And so if you spend years responding to life rather than directing it, response becomes habitual. If you spend years accepting limitations rather than challenging them, acceptance becomes habitual. And these habits, these automatic patterns, they determine your life. They determine what you do in any given situation, and because they are automatic, because you are not consciously choosing them, you do not realize that you can change them. You assume this is just who you are, this is just how you operate. But it is not who you are, it is who you have practiced being, and practice can always be changed. Third, through reinforcement. When you act according to your conditioning, when you imitate the patterns you absorbed, when you repeat the habits you developed, you produce results. And those results, even if they are not the results you want, they confirm your beliefs. They reinforce your conditioning, they strengthen your habits, and so a cycle forms. Conditioning produces beliefs, beliefs produce actions, actions produce results, results reinforce beliefs, and the cycle continues, becoming stronger with each repetition until the life you are living feels inevitable, feels like the only life possible, and you stop questioning whether it could be different. You simply accept it. And acceptance of unexamined life is what I mean by living by default. And this default living, this acceptance of inherited patterns without conscious examination, it produces a specific kind of life. A life that feels like it is happening to you rather than something you are creating. A life where you are constantly responding to circumstances rather than directing them. A life where you feel busy but not purposeful, active but not progressive, working but not building. And this creates a particular kind of dissatisfaction, not the dissatisfaction that comes from failure, but the dissatisfaction that comes from succeeding at something you never chose, from spending years doing what was expected without ever asking whether it aligned with what you actually wanted, from reaching goals that turned out to be someone else's goals. And this dissatisfaction, this vague sense that something is missing, that life should feel different, that there should be more meaning or purpose or satisfaction, this is common. This is what most people feel. But most people never trace this feeling to its source. They never recognize that it comes from living by default rather than by design, from following patterns they absorb rather than choosing patterns consciously. And so they try to fix the dissatisfaction by changing circumstances, by pursuing new opportunities, by acquiring new possessions, by seeking new relationships. But none of this addresses the real problem, because the problem is not the circumstances. The problem is that the circumstances were not chosen, they were accepted. And acceptance of unchosen circumstances will always produce dissatisfaction eventually, regardless of how favorable those circumstances appear. And here is what makes this condition so persistent. Living by default requires no effort, no decision, no conscious direction. You simply continue. You follow the path that has been laid out. You meet the expectations that have been set. You pursue the goals that have been defined, and this feels responsible. It feels like what adults do. It feels like the right way to live. And society reinforces this. Society rewards people who follow expected patterns, who pursue conventional goals, who accept the life that has been prescribed for them. And so living by default receives constant external validation. You are told you are doing well. You are told you are successful. You are told you are on the right track. And that validation makes it very difficult to question the pattern. Because if everyone is affirming that you are doing what you should be doing, why would you examine whether it is what you actually want to be doing? But I have observed this pattern for decades, and what I have seen is that the validation is temporary. The satisfaction of meeting expectations fades quickly, and what remains is the quiet awareness that you are living someone else's design, that you are following someone else's map, that you are pursuing someone else's definition of success. And that awareness, even when suppressed, even when ignored, it persists. It creates an undercurrent of dissatisfaction, a sense that something is not quite right, a feeling that this cannot be all there is. And that feeling, if listened to, if examined, if followed to its source, reveals something important. It reveals that you have been living by default, that you have been accepting without choosing, that you have been following without questioning. And that revelation, uncomfortable as it may be, is the beginning of change, because you cannot change what you do not recognize. You cannot choose differently if you do not realize you have been accepting rather than choosing. But once you see it, once you recognize that the life you are living was formed by default rather than design, possibility opens. change becomes conceivable, and the question shifts from "is this the way life is?" to "is this the life I choose?" And this recognition, this awareness that you have been living by default, it often comes at specific moments, moments of transition, moments of loss, moments when the pattern is disrupted and you are forced to examine what you have been doing automatically. Sometimes it comes through crisis, a job lost, a relationship ended, a health scare, something that breaks the routine and creates space for reflection. Sometimes it comes through achievement, reaching a goal you thought would bring satisfaction and discovering it does not, arriving at a destination you thought you wanted and realizing it was never your destination. And sometimes it comes simply through time, through reaching an age where you look back and recognize that decades have passed and you cannot clearly identify what you were building, what you were working toward, what purpose guided your effort. And all of these moments, painful as they may be, they are opportunities. Opportunities to stop, to examine, to question whether the life you have been living is the life you choose to continue living. And that question, asked honestly, can change everything. Life lived by default produces results no one consciously chose, but everyone unconsciously accepted. And once you recognize that you have been living by default, once you see that the life you are experiencing was formed through conditioning and imitation rather than conscious choice, the next question becomes obvious. And that question is, why don't people change? If living by default produces dissatisfaction, if following inherited patterns leads to building someone else's life rather than your own, if the awareness that something is wrong is so common, why do most people never change? Why do they continue living the same way year after year, decade after decade, despite knowing that something fundamental is missing? And the answer, which I have verified through countless observations, is not what most people assume. It is not that change is impossible. It is not that circumstances prevent it. It is not that resources are lacking. The reason most people never change is far simpler and far more fundamental. They do not change because they continue thinking the same thoughts. And this requires explanation. Because most people, when they want their life to change, when they recognize that their current condition is unsatisfactory, they focus on changing circumstances. They look for new opportunities, they pursue different jobs, they move to new locations, they seek new relationships. And these external changes sometimes produce temporary improvement. Sometimes they create the feeling that life is different, but the improvement does not last. The new job becomes as dissatisfying as the old one. The new location produces the same frustrations. The new relationship develops the same patterns, and they wonder why. They wonder why effort produces no lasting change, why circumstances that seem so promising become so familiar, why the same problems keep appearing regardless of external changes. But the reason is this: they changed circumstances without changing thinking. They altered the external without altering the internal. And circumstances, being effects rather than causes, will always conform to thinking over time. You can change your job, but if your thinking about work remains the same, if your beliefs about what you deserve, what you are capable of, what is possible for someone like you, if those remain unchanged, you will recreate the same experience in the new job that you had in the old one. Not immediately, not obviously, but progressively. Your thinking will shape your behavior. Your behavior will produce results, and those results will match your thinking, always, because thinking is the cause. Circumstances are the effect. And effects, even when temporarily altered, will always realign with their causes. And here is what most people do not understand about thinking. They assume thoughts are just reactions, just responses to circumstances, just commentary on what is happening. They believe that if circumstances were different, their thinking would be different. That if they had more money, they would think abundantly. That if they had better opportunities, they would think optimistically. That if they achieved success, they would think confidently. But this is backwards. This reverses cause and effect. Your thinking does not respond to circumstances. Your thinking creates circumstances. What you think about consistently, what occupies your mind most of the time, what you dwell on, what you expect, what you believe about yourself and your possibilities, that is what determines your behavior, and your behavior determines your results, and your results become your circumstances. And so if you want different circumstances, if you want your life to change, you must start by changing your thinking, not your external conditions, your internal patterns. But changing thinking is difficult, more difficult than changing circumstances, because thinking is habitual. It operates automatically. You do not consciously choose most of your thoughts. They arise from patterns you have practiced for years, sometimes decades. And these patterns, these habitual ways of thinking, they feel natural. They feel like reality. They feel like accurate observations about how life is rather than what they actually are, which is interpretations based on conditioning. And so when you try to think differently, when you attempt to challenge your habitual patterns, resistance arises. The new thoughts feel false, the old thoughts feel true. And most people encountering this resistance, this feeling that positive thinking is just pretending, they abandon the effort. They return to their habitual thinking, and their habitual thinking produces their habitual results, and nothing changes. And this is why most people who want change never achieve it. They want different results, but they continue practicing the same thinking. They want better circumstances, but they maintain the same beliefs. They want transformation, but they preserve the same mental patterns. And this cannot work. This violates the law of cause and effect. You cannot continue thinking the same thoughts and expect different outcomes. The thoughts are the cause, the outcomes are the effect. And if the cause remains constant, the effect must remain constant. This is not opinion, this is not philosophy, this is mechanics, this is how it works. And until you understand this, until you see that thinking must change before circumstances can change, you will spend your life trying to fix effects while leaving causes untouched. And that effort, no matter how intense, produces no lasting transformation. And here is another reason people do not change. They confuse wishing with thinking. They confuse hoping with directing. They believe that wanting something different is enough, that desiring better circumstances will somehow produce them. But wanting is not thinking. Hoping is not directing. Wishing for different results while maintaining the same mental patterns produces nothing. Because wishes are passive, they are desires without commitment. They are preferences without practice. And life does not respond to wishes. Life responds to dominant thinking, to the thoughts you practice most consistently, to the beliefs you reinforce daily through attention and repetition. And if your dominant thinking remains focused on limitation, on why things are difficult, on reasons you cannot succeed, then your wishes for success are meaningless. They are contradicted by the thinking you are actually practicing, and thinking always defeats wishing, always. Because thinking shapes behavior, and behavior produces results, and results become circumstances, and circumstances do not care what you wish, they reflect what you think, and effort alone does not produce change either. I have watched countless people work hard their entire lives without ever changing their condition. They put in long hours, they meet obligations, they fulfill responsibilities, but their circumstances remain essentially the same, their income stays at the same level, their opportunities remain limited, their satisfaction stays low, and they wonder why effort does not produce progress, why working hard does not lead to living better. And the reason, once again, is that they are working without changing their thinking. They are applying effort according to old patterns, according to beliefs they absorbed about how much they deserve, how much is possible, how high they can reach, and those beliefs, those unconscious limits, they cap their effort. They determine how much they attempt, how long they persist, what goals they even consider. And so their effort, while genuine, while sincere, is directed by limiting thinking, and limiting thinking produces limited results regardless of effort intensity. And this is perhaps the most important thing to understand about why people do not change. The thinking that produced your current circumstances cannot produce different circumstances. The beliefs that created your current condition cannot create a different condition. The mental patterns that brought you to where you are cannot take you beyond where you are. And so if you want change, if you want your life to be fundamentally different, you must change your thinking fundamentally, not slightly, not superficially, fundamentally. You must examine the beliefs you hold about what is possible, about what you deserve, about what someone with your background, your education, your circumstances can achieve, and you must challenge those beliefs. You must question whether they are true or whether they are simply conditioning, whether they are accurate observations or inherited limitations, and you must replace limiting beliefs with expanding beliefs, not through affirmation, not through pretending, but through understanding, through recognizing that beliefs are not facts, they are interpretations, and interpretations can be changed. But most people never do this examination. They never question their thinking because their thinking feels like reality. It feels like accurate perception rather than conditioned interpretation. And so they defend their limiting beliefs. They provide evidence for why they are true. They point to past failures as proof of current limitations. They reference external circumstances as justification for internal beliefs. And all of this reinforces the pattern, strengthens the conditioning, ensures that nothing changes. Because if you believe your limitations are real, if you defend them as accurate observations, you will never challenge them. You will never test whether they are actually true. You will simply continue living within the boundaries they establish. And those boundaries, those self-imposed limits, they become the walls of your life, not because they are real, but because you believe they are real. And belief, practiced consistently, becomes reality. Not objective reality, but experienced reality. The reality you create through the thinking you practice. And here is what makes this so tragic. Most people have far more potential than they ever develop, far more capability than they ever use, far more possibility than they ever explore. Not because they lack talent, not because opportunities are absent, but because their thinking limits what they attempt. Their beliefs determine what they consider possible, and those beliefs formed through conditioning, reinforced through repetition, defended through evidence selection, they create artificial boundaries. Boundaries that have no basis in actual capability. Boundaries that exist only in thinking, but boundaries that feel as real and as solid as physical walls. And so people live within these boundaries their entire lives, never pushing against them, never testing whether they are real, never discovering what lies beyond them. And they die having used a fraction of their capability, having explored a fraction of their possibility, having built a fraction of what they could have built, not because they could not do more, but because they never thought they could do more. And this is why I say that most people never change, not because change is impossible, but because they never change their thinking. They continue thinking the same thoughts, believing the same beliefs, practicing the same mental patterns, and those patterns maintained over years produce the same results, create the same circumstances, build the same life. And so despite desire for change, despite effort toward change, despite hope for change, nothing fundamental changes, because the cause, the thinking, remains unchanged, and unchanged causes produce unchanged effects. This is law, this is how it works, and it will continue working this way regardless of how much you wish it were different. The only way to change your life is to change your thinking. And changing thinking requires more than wanting different results. It requires examining current beliefs, challenging inherited limitations, replacing conditioned patterns with consciously chosen patterns, and practicing those new patterns consistently until they become as automatic as the old patterns were. And most people never do this work, and so most people never change. Wishing for change while maintaining unchanged thinking produces nothing but repeated disappointment. And once you understand that most people never change because they continue thinking the same thoughts, the next principle becomes essential, and it is this: life operates according to law, not according to chance, not according to luck, not according to fairness or morality or what anyone deserves, according to law. Exact, predictable, reliable law, the same kind of law that governs the physical world. And just as you cannot violate physical laws, you cannot violate these mental and behavioral laws. You can only work with them or against them, and working with them produces one set of results, and working against them produces another set of results. And the results are always proportional to how well you align with the laws, always, without exception. Now most people do not think this way. They do not see their lives as governed by law. They see their lives as governed by circumstances, by what happens to them, by opportunities that appear or do not appear, by other people's decisions, by economic conditions, by timing. And because they see it this way, because they attribute their results to external factors, they never examine the internal laws that actually determine outcomes. They never recognize that their thoughts are causes, that their beliefs shape behavior, that their habitual actions create circumstances, and so they remain at the mercy of what they perceive as random events, never understanding that what seems random is actually lawful, that what appears to be luck is actually cause and effect, that what feels like injustice is actually perfect operation of natural law, responding to causes they have been unconsciously creating. And the fundamental law, the law beneath all other laws, is this: thoughts are causes, circumstances are effects. Not sometimes, not usually, always. Your outer world is a perfect reflection of your inner world. What you experience externally is the manifestation of what you have been practicing internally. Your circumstances, your relationships, your income, your opportunities, your difficulties, all of these are effects, and effects do not appear randomly. They are produced by causes, and the causes are always internal. They are your dominant thoughts, your consistent beliefs, your habitual mental patterns, your self-concept, your expectations, and these internal causes practiced over time create external effects, not through mystical attraction, not through supernatural intervention, but through lawful causation, through the way thinking shapes perception, perception shapes decisions, decisions shape actions, and actions shape circumstances. And this law operates whether you understand it or not, whether you believe in it or not, whether you consciously apply it or unconsciously violate it. It is operating right now. It has been operating your entire life. Every circumstance you are experiencing is the effect of causes you have been creating. Not all of those causes were conscious. Most of them were not. Most were absorbed through conditioning, developed through imitation, reinforced through repetition. But conscious or unconscious, they were causes, and causes always produce effects. And the effects you are experiencing, the life you are living, this is the perfect lawful result of the causes you have been practicing. And if you do not like the effects, if you want different circumstances, you must change the causes. You must change your thinking. because thinking is always the starting point, the primary cause, the source from which everything else flows. But here is what makes this law so powerful and so frequently misunderstood. The connection between cause and effect is not always immediate, it is not always obvious. You do not think a thought today and see a corresponding circumstance appear tomorrow. The law operates over time. Your dominant thinking, the thoughts you practice most consistently over weeks and months and years, those are what produce circumstances. And so there is often a delay between cause and effect. A gap between when you practice a pattern of thinking and when you experience the corresponding result. And this delay obscures the connection. It makes it seem like circumstances are random, like results have no relation to thinking, like life is happening to you rather than being created by you. But the connection is real. The law is operating. And if you could trace your current circumstances back to their source, if you could identify the thinking patterns you were practicing 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, you would see the connection clearly. You would recognize that what you are experiencing now is the lawful result of what you were thinking then. And this time lag, this delay between cause and effect, creates a specific problem. It allows people to continue destructive thinking patterns without recognizing the connection to destructive results. They think limiting thoughts today, and nothing terrible happens immediately. They think fearful thoughts tomorrow, and their circumstances do not collapse instantly. They think doubtful thoughts for weeks, and their life continues apparently unchanged. And so they conclude that thinking does not matter, that thoughts have no real impact, that the law of cause and effect does not apply to mental and emotional patterns. But they are wrong. The law is operating, the effects are accumulating, and eventually, sometimes months later, sometimes years later, the circumstances begin to reflect the thinking. The limitation they were practicing mentally shows up as limitation in their opportunities. The fear they were rehearsing emotionally shows up as paralysis in their actions. The doubt they were reinforcing habitually shows up as failure in their results. And when the effects finally appear, when the circumstances finally manifest, they do not connect them to the thinking that caused them. They attribute the results to bad luck, to unfair circumstances, to other people's actions. And they never recognize that they created these results through the thinking they practiced months or years earlier. And the reverse is also true. When you begin thinking differently, when you start practicing new mental patterns, you do not see results immediately. You think abundantly today, and you do not become wealthy tomorrow. You think confidently this week, and you do not achieve success next week. You practice positive expectation for a month, and your circumstances may not change visibly, and this delay discourages most people. They try new thinking for a short time, they see no immediate results, and they conclude it does not work. They return to their old patterns, and they never discover that if they had continued, if they had practiced the new thinking long enough for the law to operate, the effects would have appeared, the circumstances would have changed, the results would have manifested, but they quit too soon. They give up before cause has time to produce effect, and so they never experience the law working in their favor. They only experience it working against them, perpetuating the old patterns they never stopped practicing long enough to replace. And this brings us to a critical understanding. The law of cause and effect operates continuously. There is no pause, no exception, no time when it is not functioning. Every thought you think is a cause. Every belief you hold is creating effects. Every mental pattern you practice is shaping circumstances. Right now, today, this moment. And so the question is not whether the law is operating. The question is whether you are directing it or allowing it to operate unconsciously, because it will operate either way. And if you do not direct your thinking, if you do not consciously choose what mental patterns you will practice, the law will still produce results, but those results will reflect unconscious thinking, conditioned beliefs, habitual patterns formed through imitation and repetition, and those unconscious causes almost always produce unsatisfactory effects, because unconscious thinking is reactive thinking. It is shaped by circumstances rather than shaping circumstances. It responds to environment rather than creating environment, and reactive thinking produces reactive results, results that feel like they are happening to you, results that seem beyond your control, results that confirm your belief that life is random and you are at its mercy. But when you direct your thinking consciously, when you choose what you will focus on, what you will believe, what you will expect, you are working with the law. You are creating causes deliberately, and deliberate causes produce deliberate effects. Not random results, not circumstances that feel imposed, but outcomes that reflect your conscious direction. And this is what it means to change your life. Not to change circumstances directly, but to change the causes that produce circumstances. To change your thinking, to align your mental patterns with the results you want, rather than allowing them to perpetuate results you do not want. And when you do this, when you practice directed thinking consistently over time, the law operates in your favor. The effects begin to match the causes, and circumstances begin to reflect the conscious direction you have been practicing. And here is another aspect of this law that most people never consider. The law responds to dominant thinking, not occasional thinking. It is not what you think sometimes that creates your life. It is what you think most of the time, what occupies your mind habitually, what you return to again and again when you are not consciously directing your thoughts. And for most people, this dominant thinking is negative, is focused on problems rather than solutions, on limitations rather than possibilities, on fears rather than aspirations, on what went wrong rather than what could go right. And this negative dominance, this habitual focus on the unwanted, creates corresponding circumstances. Not because the law punishes negative thinking, but because the law is neutral. It simply produces effects that match causes. And if your dominant thinking is negative, your dominant results will be negative, not as punishment, as natural consequence, as lawful effect of habitual cause. And changing this dominant thinking, shifting it from negative to positive, from limiting to expanding, from fearful to confident, this is the work. This is what produces life change, not one positive thought, not occasional optimism, but sustained, consistent, dominant positive thinking. Thinking that focuses more on what you want than what you fear, more on what is possible than what is difficult, more on solutions than problems, and this requires conscious effort, requires catching yourself when your mind drifts toward the negative, requires redirecting your attention toward what you want to create rather than what you want to avoid, requires practicing this redirection so consistently that it becomes automatic, that positive, expanding, possibility-focused thinking becomes your dominant pattern. And when that happens, when your dominant thinking shifts, the law produces different effects. Circumstances begin to change, not because you force them, but because you change the causes that create them. And so the law of cause and effect in human affairs is absolute. It is not sometimes true, it is always true. Your thoughts create your circumstances. Your beliefs shape your results. Your dominant mental patterns determine your life. And this law operates with mathematical precision, not approximately. Exactly. The effects always match the causes. The circumstances always reflect the thinking. The results always correspond to the dominant mental patterns. And once you understand this, once you see that life is not random but lawful, once you recognize that you are creating your circumstances through your thinking, whether you intend to or not, everything changes, because now you know where the power is. The power is not in circumstances. The power is in thinking. And thinking can be controlled, can be directed, can be consciously chosen. And when you direct it consistently toward what you want to create, the law must produce corresponding effects, must create matching circumstances, must transform your life to reflect the thinking you have practiced into dominance. Thoughts are causes and circumstances are effects, and this law operates with perfect precision always. And once you understand that life operates according to law, that thoughts are causes and circumstances are effects, the next question becomes practical. And that question is, how exactly does thinking shape your life? What is the mechanism through which thoughts become circumstances? How do internal patterns produce external results? And the answer, which I have verified through decades of observation, is that thinking determines everything that matters. Thinking determines what you notice, what you attempt, what you persist at, what you expect. And these four things, noticing, attempting, persisting, and expecting, these determine your results more than any external factor, more than education, more than resources, more than circumstances you were born into. Because what you notice determines what opportunities you see. What you attempt determines what you might achieve. What you persist at determines what you actually achieve. And what you expect determines how you interpret everything that happens. And all four of these critical determinants of your life outcomes are controlled entirely by your thinking. Now let me explain each of these in detail. First, thinking determines what you notice, and this is more important than most people realize, because you cannot pursue an opportunity you do not see. You cannot solve a problem you do not recognize. You cannot take advantage of a possibility you do not notice. And what you notice is determined by what you are thinking about. Your mind filters reality. It does not show you everything that exists. It shows you what matches your dominant thinking. If you are thinking about scarcity, about limitation, about why things are difficult, your mind will filter reality to show you evidence of scarcity, limitation, and difficulty. You will notice obstacles, you will see problems, you will recognize reasons why things will not work, and you will miss opportunities that are right in front of you. Not because the opportunities are not there, but because your thinking has filtered them out, has made them invisible, has directed your attention toward limitation and away from possibility. But if you change your thinking, if you focus on abundance, on possibility, on solutions, your mind filters reality differently. It shows you different things. You begin to notice opportunities you never saw before. Not because new opportunities appeared, but because your thinking changed and your perception changed with it. You see possibilities where you previously saw obstacles. You recognize solutions where you previously saw only problems. You notice resources where you previously saw only lack. And this shift in what you notice, this change in perception caused by changed thinking, this opens doors that were always there but invisible to you. And walking through those doors, pursuing those opportunities, acting on those possibilities, this is what changes circumstances. Not because circumstances changed, but because your thinking changed, and therefore what you noticed changed, and therefore what you acted upon changed. Second, thinking determines what you attempt. And this is perhaps even more critical, because there are many things you could attempt, many goals you could pursue, many directions you could move, but you only attempt what you believe is possible for someone like you, what you think you deserve, what you expect you can achieve. And these beliefs, these thoughts about what is possible for you specifically, they determine the scope of your ambition. They determine how high you aim, how much you are willing to risk, what level of success you even consider. And if your thinking is limited, if you believe that significant achievement is for other people but not for you, if you think that your background or your circumstances or your past results have determined a ceiling for your future, then you will aim low. You will attempt small things. You will pursue modest goals, not because you lack capability, but because your thinking has convinced you that larger goals are unrealistic, that greater achievement is not for people like you, that you should be satisfied with less. And here is the tragedy. Most people have far more capability than they ever test, far more potential than they ever explore, far more possibility available to them than they ever pursue, not because opportunities are absent, but because their thinking limits what they attempt. They aim at targets far below their actual capability. They pursue goals far smaller than what they could achieve. They accept limitations that have no basis in reality, and they do this not consciously, not deliberately, but automatically, because their thinking, shaped by conditioning, reinforced by past results, defended by fear, has established boundaries. And those boundaries feel real, feel like accurate assessments of what is possible, but they are not real. They are artifacts of thinking. They are limits created by belief, and belief can always be changed. But most people never change these limiting beliefs, and so they never attempt what they are actually capable of achieving. They aim low, they attempt small things, and they achieve results that match their limited attempts, and those modest results confirm their limited thinking, and the cycle continues. Third, thinking determines what you persist at, and persistence, the willingness to continue when difficulty appears, when obstacles emerge, when progress is slower than expected. This is what separates those who achieve from those who merely attempt. Because attempting is common, many people attempt things. They start projects, they pursue goals, they take initial steps. But few persist, few continue when the initial enthusiasm fades, few push through when obstacles appear, few maintain effort when results are delayed. And the difference between those who persist and those who quit is not capability. It is thinking. It is what you think when difficulty arrives. If you think this is too hard, or this is not working, or I am not capable of this, you will quit. But if you think this is temporary, or this is part of the process, or I can figure this out, you will persist. And persistence, sustained long enough, eventually overcomes most obstacles, eventually produces results, eventually leads to achievement that quitting could never reach. And your thinking in moments of difficulty, your habitual mental response when obstacles appear, this is largely unconscious. It is a pattern formed through years of practice, and for most people the pattern is to quit. Not immediately, not obviously, but progressively. They encounter difficulty. They interpret it as evidence that they should stop. They tell themselves it is not meant to be. They convince themselves that persistence would be foolish, and they quit. And they never discover what would have happened if they had continued. What results were just beyond the point where they stopped? What achievement was waiting just past the obstacle they refused to overcome? And this pattern of quitting, this habit of interpreting difficulty as a signal to stop, this is created by thinking, by beliefs about yourself, about what you can handle, about what you deserve, about whether you are the kind of person who overcomes obstacles or the kind of person who is defeated by them. And these beliefs, practiced unconsciously for years, determine whether you persist or quit, and whether you persist or quit determines what you achieve. And what you achieve determines your circumstances, and so thinking, once again, is the cause, and circumstances are the effect. Fourth, thinking determines what you expect, and expectation is more powerful than most people realize, because you move toward what you expect, not toward what you hope for, not toward what you wish for, toward what you actually expect. If you expect to fail, you will unconsciously act in ways that produce failure, not because you want to fail, but because your actions naturally align with your expectations. If you expect difficulty, you will interpret every obstacle as confirmation that things are difficult. If you expect limitation, you will notice evidence of limitation and miss evidence of possibility. In these expectations, these habitual beliefs about what will happen, they shape your behavior in subtle but powerful ways. They determine how much effort you apply, how carefully you prepare, how confidently you act. And all of these, shaped by expectation, influence results. And results either confirm or contradict expectations. And most people, when results contradict their negative expectations, when something good happens despite their pessimism, they dismiss it as luck, as an exception, as something that will not happen again. But when results confirm their negative expectations, when difficulty appears, when obstacles emerge, they accept it as proof, as evidence that their expectations were accurate. And this selective interpretation reinforces expectations, makes them stronger, makes them more likely to shape future behavior, and the cycle continues. But expectation can be changed, not through affirmation, not through pretending, but through understanding that expectation is a choice, that what you expect is determined by what you focus on, and focus can be directed. If you focus on past failures, you will expect future failures. But if you focus on past successes, even small ones, you will expect future successes. If you focus on what went wrong, you will expect more things to go wrong. But if you focus on what you learned, what you can do differently, what you can control, you will expect improvement. And that expectation, that shift from expecting failure to expecting success, it changes behavior, changes decisions, changes how much you prepare, how boldly you act, how you interpret obstacles. And changed behavior produces changed results. And changed results accumulated over time produce changed circumstances. And so thinking shapes destiny through these four mechanisms, through determining what you notice, what you attempt, what you persist at, and what you expect. And all four of these operate continuously. All four are being shaped by your thinking right now, today, this moment. And if your thinking is negative, if it is focused on limitation and difficulty and reasons why things will not work, then these four mechanisms will operate to produce circumstances that match that thinking. You will notice obstacles, attempt small things, quit easily, and expect failure, and those patterns will produce corresponding results. But if your thinking is positive, if it is focused on possibility and solutions and reasons why things might work, then these four mechanisms will operate differently. You will notice opportunities, attempt larger things, persist longer, and expect success. And those patterns will produce different results, better results. Results that accumulate into different circumstances, into a different life. And here is what makes this understanding so powerful. You can change your thinking, right now, today. You can decide what you will focus on, what you will believe about yourself, what you will expect. And those decisions practiced consistently will change what you notice, what you attempt, what you persist at, and what you expect. And those changes will change your behavior, and changed behavior will change your results, and changed results will change your circumstances. Not immediately, not magically, but lawfully, progressively, as the law of cause and effect operates on the new causes you are creating through changed thinking. And this is how thinking shapes destiny, not through mystical attraction, but through practical causation, through the mechanism of perception, ambition, persistence, and expectation, through the way thoughts determine actions and actions determine results, and results determine circumstances. And understanding this mechanism, seeing clearly how it operates, this is what allows you to use it deliberately, to direct your thinking consciously, to create the causes that will produce the effects you want, to shape your destiny, rather than accepting whatever destiny unconscious thinking produces. Thinking determines what you notice, attempt, persist at, and expect, and these four determine your destiny. And once you understand how thinking shapes destiny through what you notice, attempt, persist at, and expect, the next principle addresses something even more fundamental. Something that operates beneath your thinking, something that silently governs everything you do, and that something is your self-image, the picture you hold of yourself, the identity you carry, the answer to the question, who am I? And this self-image, this internal picture of who you believe yourself to be, it determines your performance more than any other single factor, more than your education, more than your circumstances, more than your opportunities, because you will never consistently perform in a way that contradicts how you see yourself. You will always act in accordance with your self-image, always, without exception. Now, most people have never consciously examined their self-image. They have never sat down and asked, who do I believe I am? What kind of person do I think I am? What do I believe I am capable of? What do I think I deserve? These questions are never asked. And so the self-image that governs their life, that determines their behavior, that limits or expands their possibilities, this image was formed unconsciously. It was formed through experience, through what happened to them, through what others said about them, through results they produced or failed to produce, through comparisons they made between themselves and others, and all of this information, all of these experiences and interpretations and comparisons, they accumulated into a picture, an image of self. And that image, once formed, operates automatically. It determines what feels natural, what feels possible, what feels like you. And here is how it works. When you attempt something that aligns with your self-image, something that fits with who you believe you are, it feels natural. It feels right. It feels like something someone like you would do. And so you pursue it with confidence. You apply full effort. You persist when obstacles appear, because the activity aligns with your identity. But when you attempt something that contradicts your self-image, something that does not fit with who you believe you are, it feels unnatural. It feels wrong. It feels like pretending, like you are trying to be someone you are not. And that feeling, that sense of misalignment between action and identity, creates resistance, internal resistance, psychological discomfort. And most people encountering this discomfort stop. They abandon the attempt. They return to behavior that aligns with their self-image, not because they lack capability, but because acting outside their self-image creates discomfort they cannot tolerate. And this is why people remain stuck even when they want to change, even when they understand that their current patterns are unproductive, even when they know what they should do differently. They cannot sustain behavior that contradicts their self-image. They can force it temporarily. They can act differently for days, sometimes weeks, but eventually the self-image reasserts itself. The internal picture of who they are pulls them back to behavior that matches that picture, and they find themselves repeating old patterns, producing old results, living the same life they wanted to change. Not because they did not try, not because they did not know better, but because their self-image limited what they could sustain, because the new behavior contradicted who they believed themselves to be. And behavior that contradicts identity cannot be maintained indefinitely. It requires too much force, too much conscious effort, too much resistance against the internal picture of self. And so the self-image, this unconscious picture of who you are, it functions as a thermostat. It maintains your performance within a certain range. If you perform below that range, if your results fall beneath what you believe someone like you should achieve, the self-image creates discomfort, pushes you to improve, motivates you to perform better. But if you perform above that range, if your results exceed what you believe someone like you deserves, the self-image also creates discomfort. Creates the feeling that you are getting ahead of yourself, that this is not sustainable, that you should not expect too much, and that discomfort pushes you back down, causes you to unconsciously sabotage your own success, to find ways to return to the level that matches your self-image. And this happens automatically, unconsciously, without your awareness that the self-image is operating to maintain the status quo. And I have observed this pattern countless times. Someone achieves success that exceeds their self-image. They earn more money than they believe someone like them should earn. They receive recognition they do not believe they deserve. They achieve results they never thought possible for someone with their background. And instead of celebrating, instead of building on that success, they become uncomfortable, anxious, worried that it will not last, convinced it was luck. And that discomfort drives behavior that undermines the success. They make poor decisions, they take unnecessary risks, they sabotage relationships, they create problems that did not exist, and eventually their circumstances return to a level that matches their self-image. And when that happens, when they are back to where they believe they belong, the discomfort disappears. They feel normal again, they feel like themselves. Even though normal means less successful, even though feeling like themselves means accepting limitation, the alignment between self-image and circumstances has been restored. And restoration of that alignment produces psychological comfort, even when it means accepting external limitation. And this is the power of self-image. It is not just a picture you hold, it is a governing mechanism, a control system that maintains your performance within the boundaries it establishes. And those boundaries for most people are far narrower than their actual capability, far smaller than what they could achieve, far lower than what is actually possible for them. But the boundaries feel real, feel like accurate assessments of who they are, feel like honest recognition of their limitations, and so they accept them. They live within them. They never push against them to discover whether they are real or whether they are simply beliefs, simply pictures formed through limited experience and reinforced through selective attention. But here is what most people never realize. The self-image is not fixed. It is not an accurate representation of your actual capability. It is a picture formed through interpretation of experience, and interpretations can be changed, pictures can be updated, self-image can be rebuilt. Not through affirmation, not through pretending, but through evidence, through new evidence that contradicts the old image, through experiences that demonstrate capability you did not believe you had, through achievements that exceed what you thought possible for someone like you. And that evidence, accumulated through action, through attempting things that contradict the old self-image, through persisting when the internal resistance appears, through proving to yourself repeatedly that you are more capable than you believed, that evidence changes the picture, gradually, progressively, until the new self-image becomes natural, until the expanded identity becomes who you are. And changing self-image is the key to permanent life change, because you can change behavior temporarily through willpower, through forcing yourself to act differently. But forced behavior is exhausting. It cannot be sustained. Eventually, willpower depletes. Eventually, you revert to what feels natural. And what feels natural is determined by self-image. But if you change the self-image, if you rebuild the internal picture of who you are, then different behavior becomes natural, becomes effortless, becomes what you do because it is who you are. And behavior aligned with identity can be sustained indefinitely. It does not require force, does not require constant conscious effort. It runs automatically. And automatic behavior, sustained over years, produces permanent results, produces lasting change, produces transformation that does not reverse. And so the work of changing your life must include changing your self-image, must include examining who you believe you are, what you believe you are capable of, what you believe you deserve, and challenging those beliefs, testing them, acting in ways that contradict them to discover whether they are true or whether they are simply limitations created by interpretation. And each time you act outside your current self-image, each time you attempt something you believe is not for someone like you, each time you persist despite the internal discomfort, you create evidence. Evidence that the old picture was incomplete. Evidence that you are more than you believed. Evidence that the boundaries were artificial. And that evidence, accumulated through repeated action, through sustained practice, through consistent demonstration of capability that exceeds the old image, that evidence rebuilds the picture, creates a new self-image, one that includes more possibility, more capability, more permission to achieve, more expectation of success. And this new self-image, once established through sufficient evidence, becomes your new governing mechanism, your new thermostat. And it maintains performance at a higher level, not through force, through natural alignment, through the automatic operation of behavior that matches identity. And when behavior and identity align at a higher level, results improve, circumstances change, life transforms, not temporarily, permanently, because the change is internal, the self-image has expanded, the identity has shifted, and external circumstances naturally conform to internal identity over time, always, because you always move toward alignment between who you are and what you experience. And when who you are changes, what you experience must change to match. And so if you want your life to change permanently, if you want transformation that lasts rather than temporary improvement that reverses, you must change your self-image. You must expand the picture you hold of yourself. You must build evidence through action that you are more capable than you currently believe, more deserving than you currently accept, more powerful than you currently recognize. And that evidence, built consistently through acting outside your current self-image, through demonstrating capability that exceeds your current identity, through proving to yourself repeatedly that the old picture was too small, that evidence will rebuild the image, will create a new identity, will establish a new self-concept that permits, that encourages, that naturally produces the life you consciously choose rather than the life unconscious conditioning created. You perform according to your self-image, and permanent change requires rebuilding that image through evidence. And once you understand that your self-image governs your performance, that you always act in accordance with who you believe yourself to be, the next principle addresses what organizes all of this potential into actual results. And that principle is the necessity of a definite aim, a clear, specific, consciously chosen direction. Because you can change your thinking, you can rebuild your self-image, you can understand the laws that govern outcomes, but without a definite aim, without a clear target toward which all this understanding and effort is directed, you will scatter, you will move in multiple directions simultaneously, you will pursue conflicting goals, and scattered effort, no matter how intense, produces minimal results, because results require focus, require concentration of energy toward a single point, require all of your capability aligned toward one chosen destination. And that alignment, that organization of all your resources toward one purpose, that comes only from a definite aim. Now, most people do not have a definite aim. They have vague hopes, general wishes. They want things to be better. They want more money. They want better relationships. They want to feel more satisfied. But these are not definite aims. These are feelings, preferences, desires without specificity. And feelings cannot organize effort. Preferences cannot direct behavior. Desires without definition cannot create the focus required for achievement. And so people with vague aims work hard but accomplish little. They stay busy but build nothing. They expend enormous energy moving in circles. And they wonder why effort does not produce results, why working does not lead to achieving, why years pass without meaningful progress. And the reason is always the same: they have no definite aim, no clear target, no specific destination toward which their effort is consistently directed. But a definite aim is different. A definite aim is specific. It is measurable, it is written. It states exactly what you intend to create, by when you intend to create it, and what you will do to achieve it. It is not "I want to be successful," it is "I will build a business that produces this specific income by this specific date, by providing this specific value to this specific group of people." It is not "I want to be healthier," it is "I will weigh this specific amount and have this specific level of fitness by this specific date, by practicing these specific daily actions." It is not "I want better relationships," it is "I will develop this specific quality in my relationships by this specific time, by practicing these specific behaviors daily. And this specificity, this clarity, this precision of aim, it changes everything. Because now you have a standard, a way of evaluating whether your daily actions serve your aim or distract from it, whether an opportunity moves you toward your target or away from it, whether effort is productive or merely active. And a definite aim organizes behavior automatically. Once you have clarity about what you are building, once you know exactly where you are going, decisions become simpler. You do not have to evaluate every opportunity from scratch. You do not have to weigh every option without criteria. You simply ask, "Does this serve my aim?" And if it does, you pursue it. If it does not, you refuse it. And this simplicity, this clarity of decision, it eliminates the exhausting work of constant deliberation. It removes the anxiety of not knowing whether you are doing the right thing. It provides the certainty that comes from having a clear standard against which to measure every choice. And that certainty produces confidence, and confidence produces action. And action, organized by a definite aim, produces results that scattered action never can. But a definite aim does something else, something most people never consider. It focuses your attention. And attention, once focused, notices things that scattered attention misses. When you have a definite aim, when you know exactly what you are trying to create, you begin to notice opportunities related to that aim, information that serves that aim, people who can help you achieve that aim, resources that support that aim. And these things were always there, they always existed, but without a definite aim, without focused attention, they were invisible to you. Your attention was scattered across too many possibilities, and scattered attention sees everything superficially and nothing deeply. But focused attention, attention organized by a definite aim, sees what matters, recognizes what serves, identifies what advances progress. And that focused perception is what creates the feeling that opportunities appear once you commit to a goal. Not because new opportunities were created, but because your attention, focused by your aim, now notices opportunities that were always present but previously invisible. And a definite aim also organizes other people's behavior toward you. When you have a vague aim, when you tell people you want to be successful or happy or fulfilled, they cannot help you. They do not know what to offer, what to suggest, who to introduce you to. But when you have a definite aim, when you can state clearly and specifically what you are building, people understand. They recognize how they might help. They think of connections they can make, they offer information they have. They provide resources they know about, not because they become more generous, but because your clarity gives them a way to help. And people want to help those who have clear direction, who know what they want, who are committed to a specific aim. Because clear direction feels purposeful, feels serious, feels like something worth supporting, but vague direction feels uncertain, feels tentative, feels like something that might change tomorrow, and people do not invest in uncertainty. They invest in clarity. And so a definite aim attracts support that vagueness never receives. It creates opportunities that confusion never sees. It produces results that scattered effort never achieves. And this is not mystical. This is not attraction in the supernatural sense. This is the practical operation of focus, of attention organized by clarity, of behavior directed by specificity, of energy concentrated rather than dispersed. And concentration, sustained over time, always produces greater results than dispersion. Always. Because power comes from focus, from directing all available force toward a single point, and that single point, that target, that destination, that is what your definite aim provides. But most people resist establishing a definite aim, and the resistance comes from fear. Fear that if they commit to one direction, they will miss out on other possibilities. Fear that if they choose one goal, they will discover it was the wrong goal. Fear that if they define what they want specifically, they might fail to achieve it and will have to face that failure. And so they remain vague, they keep their options open, they pursue multiple possibilities simultaneously, and this feels safe, feels like hedging, feels like protecting against the disappointment of choosing wrong or failing to achieve. But this safety is false, because vagueness guarantees mediocrity. Pursuing everything guarantees achieving nothing significant. Keeping options open guarantees that no single option receives sufficient focus to produce meaningful results. And so the very strategy meant to protect against failure ensures that real success never occurs. But here is the truth. Committing to a definite aim is not dangerous. Remaining vague is dangerous, because you are going to spend the next 5 years somewhere, doing something, working at something, and those 5 years will pass whether you direct them or not. And at the end of those 5 years, you will either have built something specific, something chosen, something that reflects a definite aim you committed to and pursued consistently, or you will have scattered your effort across multiple vague possibilities and built nothing significant. And the time will pass either way, the effort will be expended either way, but the results, the outcomes, the transformation produced, that will be determined entirely by whether you had a definite aim or whether you remained vague. And vagueness, sustained over years, always produces regret, always produces the feeling that time was wasted, that potential was unused, that life passed without building anything meaningful. But a definite aim, pursued consistently, produces something different. It produces achievement, it produces results you can see, it produces progress you can measure, it produces the satisfaction of building something you chose to build, of moving toward a destination you consciously selected, of seeing your effort compound into visible results. And that satisfaction, that sense of purposeful progress, it is worth more than the false safety of keeping options open, worth more than the temporary comfort of avoiding commitment, because purposeful progress is what makes effort meaningful, it is what makes work satisfying, is what makes life feel directed rather than random. And a proper definite aim includes 3 elements. First, the exact outcome you intend to create and the date by which you will create it. Not approximately, exactly, not someday, by a specific date. This precision creates accountability, creates urgency, creates the ability to measure whether you are on track or falling behind. Second, the value you will create to earn that outcome, what you will provide, what problems you will solve, what needs you will meet, because aims built on value creation are sustainable, but aims built on hope or luck are fragile. And third, the specific daily actions you will take to create that value. Not everything you might do, the specific actions that matter most, the ones that if performed daily, will move you toward your aim faster than anything else. And these actions, identified clearly and practiced consistently, become the bridge between where you are and where you intend to be. And once you have established your definite aim, once you have written it clearly with all 3 elements, you review it daily, every morning before your day begins, every evening before you sleep. You read it until it is memorized, until it occupies your thinking automatically, until every decision is evaluated against it. And this daily review keeps your attention focused, keeps your aim present, keeps your effort organized, because without regular review, the aim fades. Other concerns capture attention, old patterns reassert themselves, and effort scatters again. But with daily review, the aim remains clear, it guides decisions, it determines priorities, it prevents drift, and drift prevented is progress enabled. And progress accumulated through consistent action, organized by a definite aim, produces transformation, produces the life change you seek, not through luck, not through hoping, but through the natural, lawful result of focused effort sustained over time toward a clearly defined destination. A definite aim organizes thought, behavior, and opportunity around one chosen destination, producing results vagueness never can. And once you have established a definite aim, once you have clarity about what you are building, and daily reminders keeping that aim present in your thinking, you arrive at a moment that determines whether transformation will actually occur or whether it will remain merely an intention. And that moment is this: you must accept full responsibility for achieving your aim, not partial responsibility. Not responsibility when things go well and blame when they do not. Complete, unconditional, absolute responsibility for the results you produce. And this acceptance, this claiming of total ownership over your outcomes, this is the moment when power transfers from circumstances to you. This is when control becomes possible. This is when change shifts from something you hope for to something you create. Now, accepting responsibility is the most difficult requirement of life change, because responsibility means giving up something most people cling to desperately. It means giving up the comfort of blame, of explaining your circumstances as the result of forces beyond your control, of attributing your limitations to what others did or failed to do, of pointing to external factors as the reason your life is not what you want it to be. And these explanations, these attributions of cause to external sources, they feel justified, they feel true, they feel like accurate descriptions of why things are difficult, and in some sense they are true. External factors do influence outcomes. Other people do affect your circumstances. Events beyond your control do occur. But while these things are true, focusing on them produces no change. Dwelling on external causes produces no power. Explaining your limitations through factors you cannot control guarantees that those limitations remain permanent. Because here is the law. Responsibility and control are inseparable. You cannot have one without the other. If you refuse responsibility, if you insist that your circumstances are caused by forces external to you, then you also refuse control. You declare that those external forces, not you, determine your outcomes, and so you remain dependent on those forces changing. You remain waiting for circumstances to improve, for other people to help, for opportunities to appear, for conditions to become favorable. And that waiting, that external orientation, keeps you powerless, keeps you reactive, keeps you at the mercy of factors you do not control. And factors you do not control will not organize themselves for your benefit, will not align themselves to serve your aims, will not change in the ways you need them to change. And so waiting for external change produces no transformation. It produces only continued dependence on circumstances that may never shift in your favor. But the moment you accept responsibility, the moment you say, my results are mine, my circumstances are the product of my thinking and my actions, and if I want them to change, I must change, everything shifts. Not externally, not immediately, but internally. You stop feeling like a victim. You stop feeling powerless. You stop waiting for rescue. And you start recognizing what you can control. And what you can control always, in every circumstance, regardless of external conditions, is your response, your thinking, your decisions, your actions, your interpretation of events, your focus of attention, your level of effort, your persistence in difficulty. And these things, these internal factors, while they may seem small compared to external circumstances, they are sufficient. They are more than sufficient. Because sustained response, practiced consistently over time, shapes circumstances, not immediately, not perfectly, but progressively, reliably, until external conditions begin to reflect internal direction. And accepting responsibility does not mean accepting fault. This distinction is critical. Fault looks backward. It assigns blame for what happened. It asks who caused the problem. But responsibility looks forward. It claims power over what happens next. It asks what I will do now. And you can accept responsibility for your future without accepting fault for your past. You can say, I did not create every circumstance I face. I did not choose the family I was born into. I did not select the opportunities that were or were not available. I did not cause everything that happened to me. But I am responsible for what I do now. I am responsible for how I respond to what happened. I am responsible for whether I remain defined by past circumstances or move beyond them. I am responsible for the thinking I practice, the actions I take, the effort I apply, the persistence I demonstrate. And that responsibility, that forward-looking ownership of response, is where power resides. But most people never make this shift. They remain focused on fault, on who is to blame, on what external factors created their current condition. And as long as they remain focused on fault, on backward-looking blame, they cannot claim forward-looking responsibility, cannot recognize the power they have over what happens next. And so they remain stuck, not because change is impossible, but because they have not claimed the responsibility required for change to occur. They are still waiting for circumstances to shift, for external factors to improve, for someone else to solve the problem they will not take responsibility for solving themselves. And here is what I have observed. People who transform their lives, who move from limitation to achievement, from struggle to success, from stagnation to progress, they all make the same shift at some point. They stop blaming, they stop explaining their circumstances through external causes. They stop waiting for conditions to improve, and they accept responsibility, not for everything that happened, but for everything that happens next. And that acceptance, that claiming of responsibility, produces immediate internal change. They stop feeling like victims, they stop feeling dependent, they stop feeling helpless, and they start feeling capable, start feeling empowered, start feeling like they have control over their direction, even if they do not have control over every circumstance. And this feeling, this sense of personal power, it changes behavior. When you feel responsible, you act differently. You stop waiting and start creating. You stop explaining and start doing. You stop focusing on obstacles and start focusing on actions you can take despite obstacles. And those actions, those responses to circumstances, rather than reactions to circumstances, they produce different results. Small results initially, but results nonetheless. And results, even small ones, confirm that you have power, that your response matters, that you are not helpless, and that confirmation builds confidence. And confidence produces more action, and more action produces more results. And the cycle continues, building until the accumulated results of sustained responsible action transform circumstances that blame could never change. But accepting responsibility also requires something most people resist. It requires you to examine your contribution to your current circumstances, to look honestly at how you're thinking, your decisions, your actions, your habits, how all of these contributed to creating the life you are living. And this examination is uncomfortable, because it reveals that you are not just a victim of circumstances, that you participated in creating circumstances, that your beliefs limited what you attempted, that your fears prevented actions that might have produced different results, that your habits practiced unconsciously produced outcomes you did not consciously choose. And seeing this, recognizing your contribution to outcomes you do not like, this can be painful, can feel like admitting failure, can feel like accepting blame, but it is not blame, it is recognition. Recognition that if you contributed to creating circumstances you do not want, you can also contribute to creating circumstances you do want. That if your thinking and actions produce these results, different thinking and different actions can produce different results. That if you had power to create limitation, you also have power to create expansion. And this recognition, while it may begin with discomfort, it ends with hope, real hope. Not the vague hope that things will somehow get better, but the concrete hope that comes from recognizing you have power to make things better. That change is not dependent on external factors. That transformation is not waiting for permission. That you can begin right now to create different causes that will produce different effects. And so the practice is this. You examine your current circumstances honestly, and you ask, what have I been doing that contributed to this? Not what others did, not what circumstances imposed. What have I been doing? What thinking have I been practicing? What beliefs have I been holding? What actions have I been taking or avoiding? And you answer honestly, without softening, without excusing. And then you ask, what will I do differently? What thinking will I practice now? What beliefs will I replace? What actions will I take regardless of circumstances? And you commit to those changes, not tentatively, not conditionally, but completely. And you practice them daily, and you refuse to return to blame when difficulty appears. Refuse to explain new obstacles through external causes. Refuse to surrender the responsibility you have claimed. And that sustained responsibility, that continued ownership of outcomes, that refusal to return to blame, that is what produces lasting transformation. Because responsibility sustained becomes identity. You stop being someone who blames and become someone who takes responsibility. And that identity shift changes everything. Changes what you attempt, what you persist at, what you expect, what you accept. And those changes accumulated over time transform circumstances, not because circumstances decided to be favorable, but because you decided to take responsibility for creating favorable circumstances through the only means available to you, your thinking, your decisions, your actions, sustained consistently, until the results you take responsibility for creating actually appear. Responsibility claimed completely transfers power from circumstances to self and makes change inevitable rather than hopeful. And once you have accepted full responsibility for your outcomes, once you have claimed complete ownership of what happens next, the next principle addresses how you actually convert that responsibility into results, how you translate intention into achievement, how you transform the aim you have established into the life you are living. And the answer is discipline, daily discipline, consistent action. The practice of doing what you decided matters regardless of how you feel, regardless of circumstances, regardless of whether you see immediate results. Because responsibility without action produces nothing, understanding without practice creates no change, and aims without discipline remain forever intentions that never become reality. Now, most people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline means forcing yourself to do unpleasant things. They think it means constant struggle, constant resistance against your natural inclinations, constant application of willpower to override what you actually want to do. And because they see discipline this way, because they associate it with force and struggle and unpleasantness, they avoid it. They tell themselves they will act when they feel motivated, when inspiration arrives, when circumstances become more favorable, when the time is right. But motivation is unreliable, inspiration is temporary. Circumstances rarely become more favorable on their own, and the right time never arrives. And so people who wait for these conditions before practicing discipline remain waiting indefinitely, remain intending without acting, remain hoping without building, and years pass in this state of perpetual preparation that never leads to actual practice. But discipline, properly understood, is not force, it is not struggle, it is alignment. It is the practice of acting in accordance with your aim rather than in accordance with your emotions. It is doing what you decided matters even when you do not feel like doing it. Not because you are forcing yourself, but because you have decided that your aim is more important than your momentary feelings, that your long-term transformation is more valuable than your short-term comfort, that the life you are building is worth more than the temporary pleasure of avoiding effort. And this is not struggle, this is choice, conscious choice, the choice to honor your commitments to yourself, even when honoring them is inconvenient. And here is the law: small actions repeated daily produce greater results than large actions performed sporadically. Because consistency compounds, sporadic effort, no matter how intense, resets, starts over, produces no accumulation. You work intensely for a week, then you coast for a week, then you work intensely again. And this cycle produces the feeling of effort without the reality of progress, because progress requires accumulation, requires each day building on the previous day, requires actions that compound over time, and compounding requires consistency, requires showing up every day, requires practicing the actions that serve your aim, whether you feel motivated or not, whether the work feels productive or not, whether results are visible or not. But most people do not practice this kind of consistency. They have bursts of effort followed by periods of inaction. They work hard when they feel inspired. They coast when inspiration fades. They take action when circumstances are favorable. They retreat when circumstances become difficult. And this inconsistency guarantees that their effort never compounds, never accumulates into transformation, because transformation is not built through occasional intense effort. It is built through modest effort sustained so consistently that it becomes automatic, that it becomes habit, that it becomes what you do because it is who you are. And the practice of discipline is simple but not easy. You identify the one or two actions that, if performed daily, would move you toward your aim faster than anything else. Not everything you could do, not everything that might help. The one or two actions that matter most, the ones that, if practiced consistently, would produce the majority of your progress. And you commit to doing those actions every single day, for 90 days minimum. No exceptions, no negotiations, no skipping because you are tired or busy or discouraged or unmotivated. You simply do them. You do them first thing in the morning, before anything else can interfere, before the demands of the day arrive, before your energy is consumed by urgency, before your attention is captured by distraction. You protect the first hour of your day for the actions that serve your aim, and you perform those actions with full focus until they are complete or until the hour ends. And here is what happens when you practice this. The first week is difficult. The actions feel forced. They require conscious decision. They require overriding the desire to do something easier. They require willpower. But if you continue, if you refuse to break the chain, something begins to shift. By the second week, the actions feel slightly less difficult. The resistance decreases. The willpower required diminishes. By the third week, the actions start to feel natural. They become part of your morning routine. They require less conscious decision. And by the end of 90 days, they have become automatic. They are no longer something you have to decide to do. They are simply what you do. They are who you have become through consistent practice. And this transformation from conscious action to automatic habit is critical because willpower is limited, motivation is temporary, but habits once established run automatically. They do not require willpower, do not depend on motivation. They operate beneath conscious awareness. They are what you do because you have practiced doing them so consistently that not doing them feels strange. And when the actions that serve your aim become habits, when they become automatic, discipline becomes effortless, not because the actions are easier, but because the resistance is gone. You are no longer fighting yourself. You are no longer overriding reluctance. You are simply doing what has become natural through consistent practice. And this is how lasting change is built, not through constant willpower, not through permanent motivation, but through establishing habits that align with your aim. Through practicing disciplined action consistently enough that it becomes undisciplined action, action that requires no discipline because it has become automatic. And automatic action, sustained over months and years, produces transformation that forced action never can, because forced action is exhausting, it depletes willpower. It cannot be sustained indefinitely, but automatic action, action that has become habit, that can be sustained for life, and sustained action is what produces sustained results, results that accumulate, results that compound, results that transform circumstances permanently rather than temporarily. But there is a critical rule that makes the difference between establishing habits and abandoning them. The rule is this: never miss twice. If you practice your action every day for 20 days and then miss on day 21, you do not miss on day 22. You return immediately, because missing once is human, missing twice is the beginning of a pattern. And patterns once established are difficult to break. But if you never allow 2 consecutive misses, if you always return after a single miss, the habit remains intact. The momentum is preserved. and you continue building toward the 90 days required for the action to become automatic. And discipline produces something beyond results. It produces self-trust. Every time you do what you said you would do, every time you keep a commitment to yourself, every time you honor your aim through action even when you do not feel like it, you build trust with yourself. You prove that you are someone who follows through, someone who keeps commitments, someone who does what they decide to do, and that proof, that accumulated evidence of reliability, changes your self-image. You stop seeing yourself as someone who intends and never acts. You start seeing yourself as someone who decides and follows through. And that identity shift, that transformation from intender to actor, is what makes discipline permanent. Because now you are not forcing yourself to act. You are acting in alignment with who you have become. And action aligned with identity is natural, is sustainable. And discipline also produces visible progress. When you practice the same actions daily, when you show up consistently, you can measure improvement. You can see that today you are further than you were 30 days ago. That this month produced more than last month. That progress is occurring. And that visible progress, that tangible evidence that effort is producing results, sustains hope, maintains direction, prevents the discouragement that causes most people to quit. Because when progress is visible, when you can measure movement toward your aim, continuation becomes easier. The sacrifice feels worthwhile, the effort feels productive. And you persist not through willpower, but through the momentum created by visible progress toward a clearly defined destination. And so discipline is not optional. It is not something you practice when you feel motivated. It is the mechanism through which aims become results, through which understanding becomes application, through which responsibility becomes transformation. And anyone can build it. Not instantly, not effortlessly, but deliberately, through identifying what actions matter most, through committing to practice those actions daily, through never missing twice, through continuing until the actions become habits, and through allowing those habits practiced over months and years to transform your life, not through dramatic change, but through quiet accumulation, through small actions repeated so consistently that they compound into transformation no single action could ever produce. Discipline is alignment practiced daily until it becomes automatic, and automatic action sustained produces permanent transformation. And once you have established daily discipline, once you have built habits that align with your aim and practiced them consistently enough that they run automatically, the next principle addresses something that operates largely beneath conscious awareness but influences everything. And that principle is environment. The people you spend time with, the information you consume, the conversations you engage in, the spaces you inhabit, the inputs you expose yourself to daily. Because you are not operating in isolation, you are embedded in an environment. Surrounded by influences, absorbing input constantly from everything around you. And that environment, those influences, that input, they are either supporting your transformation or undermining it. They are either reinforcing the thinking and behavior that produces change or reinforcing the thinking and behavior that maintains the old patterns, and you cannot remain neutral to this influence. Now, most people never examine their environment. They simply continue living where they have always lived, associating with the people they have always known, consuming the content they have always consumed, engaging in the conversations they have always had, and they wonder why change is so difficult, why maintaining discipline requires constant effort, why their thinking keeps drifting back toward old patterns, why new behaviors feel unnatural even after weeks of practice. And the reason is simple: their environment is reinforcing the old patterns, the old identity, the old limitations, and no amount of personal discipline can overcome an environment that constantly pulls you backward. Because environment shapes thinking, and thinking shapes behavior, and behavior shapes results. And if your environment is shaped by limitation, your results will reflect that influence regardless of your personal intentions. And here is the law: you become like the people you spend the most time with, not intentionally, not consciously, but gradually, automatically, through the simple mechanism of exposure and absorption. Their thinking becomes your thinking, their beliefs become your beliefs, their expectations become your expectations, their standards become your standards, their habits influence your habits. And if those people, the people closest to you, accept limitation, if they see change as unlikely, if they believe transformation is for other people but not for people like them, you will absorb those patterns, and those patterns will undermine every principle we have discussed. They will weaken your discipline, they will erode your sense of responsibility, they will limit your aims, they will damage your self-image, and they will prevent transformation regardless of your personal effort. But if you surround yourself with people who have changed their lives, who have transformed their circumstances, who see challenges as temporary rather than permanent, who believe growth is possible, who practice discipline naturally, you will absorb those patterns instead. And those patterns will support transformation. They will strengthen your discipline. They will reinforce your responsibility. They will expand your aims. They will build your self-image. And they will make change feel natural rather than exceptional. Not because you became different through effort, but because your environment shaped you differently through exposure. An environment is always shaping you. The question is whether you are shaping your environment deliberately or allowing it to shape you by default. And so the practice is this. You examine your current environment honestly. The 5 people you spend the most time with, the content you consume most regularly, the conversations you participate in most frequently, the spaces you occupy most consistently, and you ask, is this environment supporting my transformation or undermining it? And you answer based on influence, not affection. Based on whether these associations reinforce the thinking that produces change or the thinking that maintains limitation. Based on whether this content expands your sense of possibility or reinforces your sense of restriction. Based on whether these conversations elevate your standards or lower them. And if the environment is undermining your transformation, you change it, not cruelly, not suddenly, but deliberately, progressively, systematically. You reduce time with people who reinforce limitation, not because you judge them, not because they are bad people, but because their influence works against your transformation. You increase time with people who demonstrate possibility, who have achieved what you are attempting, who think differently about what is achievable, who maintain standards higher than yours currently are. And you do this not to abandon relationships, but to protect transformation. Because transformation is fragile in its early stages. It requires support. It requires reinforcement. And if the people around you constantly question your aims, constantly suggest you should lower your expectations, constantly remind you of past failures, that environment makes persistence nearly impossible, makes discipline exhausting, makes transformation feel like swimming against a current that never stops. But when you change your environment, when you align your associations with your aims, persistence becomes easier. Discipline requires less effort. Transformation feels natural, because now the current flows with you rather than against you. Now the influences you absorb support rather than undermine. Now the patterns you are exposed to expand rather than limit. And this environmental alignment, this deliberate curation of influence, accelerates change, not because you worked harder, but because you removed resistance, because you stopped fighting against an environment that pulled you backward and created an environment that pushes you forward. And environment includes more than people. It includes what you expose yourself to daily, the news you watch, the content you consume, the information you absorb, and most of what people consume daily reinforces limitation, focuses on problems, emphasizes what is wrong, highlights dangers, amplifies fears, and this constant exposure to negative input shapes your worldview, makes transformation seem unlikely, makes change seem dangerous, makes improvement seem rare, makes success seem reserved for others. And that worldview, reinforced daily through the content you consume, makes disciplined action nearly impossible to sustain. Because why work toward change if change is unlikely? Why practice discipline if success is rare? Why maintain effort if transformation is for other people but not for you? But when you change what you consume, when you deliberately expose yourself to content that demonstrates transformation, that shows examples of people who changed, that focuses on principles rather than problems, that highlights possibility rather than limitation, your worldview shifts. You begin to see that change is normal, that transformation is achievable, that the principles we have discussed actually work, and that shift in worldview supports everything else. It makes discipline easier. It strengthens responsibility, it clarifies your aim, it builds your self-image, because now you have models, examples, proof that what you are attempting is possible, and proof, absorbed daily, builds confidence, and confidence produces action, and action produces results, and results confirm that the proof was accurate. And physical environment matters too. The spaces you inhabit daily influence your thinking more than you realize. If your physical environment is cluttered, disorganized, filled with reminders of old patterns, it reinforces those patterns. It keeps your attention on what was rather than what will be. It makes new behavior feel out of place. But if you change your environment, if you organize it, if you remove reminders of limitation and add reminders of your aim, your thinking shifts. Your space begins to reflect who you are becoming rather than who you were. And that reflection, encountered daily, supports the new identity you are building through disciplined action. And so you examine your physical space, your workspace, your living space, the areas you occupy most frequently, and you ask, does this environment support the person I am becoming or the person I was? And you make changes. You organize what is chaotic. You remove what reinforces old patterns. You add what reminds you of your aim. You create a space that makes disciplined action easier rather than harder. that makes new behavior feel natural rather than foreign, that supports transformation rather than maintaining limitation. And these changes, these environmental adjustments, they reduce friction. They make discipline require less effort. They make consistency more likely. They make transformation feel supported rather than resisted. And here is what happens when you deliberately align your environment with your transformation. Progress accelerates, not because you suddenly became more capable, not because you developed new abilities, but because you removed obstacles, because you stopped fighting against an environment that pulled you backward, because you created conditions that naturally support the thinking and behavior that produce change. And that support, that environmental alignment, allows the other principles to work more effectively. Discipline becomes easier when your environment supports it. Responsibility feels more natural when the people around you demonstrate it. Your aim remains clearer when your space reminds you of it. Your self-image expands faster when your associations reflect expanded possibility. And so environment is not optional. It is not something you consider after establishing all the other principles. It is essential. It is the context in which all the other principles operate. And context determines whether principles produce results easily or with tremendous difficulty. A supportive environment makes transformation natural. An undermining environment makes transformation nearly impossible. And you have control over your environment. Not complete control, not immediate control, but progressive control. You can change who you spend time with, what you consume, where you work, how your space is organized, what conversations you engage in. And those changes made deliberately over time create an environment that supports rather than resists, that accelerates rather than delays, that makes transformation feel like you are working with natural forces rather than against them. Environment shapes thinking automatically, and aligned environment makes transformation natural rather than forced. And once you have aligned your environment, once you have surrounded yourself with influences that support rather than undermine your transformation, the next principle addresses something that destroys more change efforts than perhaps any other factor, and that factor is impatience. The desperate need for immediate results, the inability to tolerate the time required for real transformation to unfold, the constant evaluation of progress against unrealistic timelines, the conclusion that if change is not visible now, it is not happening at all. And this impatience, this demand for immediate evidence of transformation, causes most people to abandon their efforts just before those efforts would have produced visible results, just before the accumulated discipline would have crossed the threshold into obvious progress, just before the compound effect of consistent action would have become apparent. Now, here is what most people do not understand about time and transformation. Change does not unfold linearly. It does not proceed in steady, visible increments. It does not produce equal results for equal effort at every stage. Change unfolds progressively, in stages, according to natural law. In the early stages, the first months, sometimes the first year, produce minimal visible results. You practice discipline daily. You maintain your aim. You take responsibility. You align your environment. But your circumstances do not seem to improve proportionally. Your income may increase slightly. Your capabilities may grow modestly. Your confidence may strengthen gradually. But transformation, the kind of dramatic transformation you are seeking, is not yet visible, and this is where most people quit. They evaluate their progress based on immediate results. They measure their effort against visible outcomes. And when those outcomes seem inadequate compared to the effort invested, when the gap between where they are and where they want to be still seems enormous, they become discouraged. And discouragement leads to reduced discipline, and reduced discipline leads to slower progress, and slower progress leads to more discouragement, and the cycle continues until they quit entirely, not because transformation was impossible, not because the principles were not working, but because they evaluated progress at the wrong stage using the wrong measure. They expected linear results from a process that operates exponentially. They demanded immediate evidence from a law that operates over time. But this evaluation, this judgment based on immediate visible results, is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how transformation occurs. Because transformation is not produced through steady accumulation, it is produced through compounding, and compounding by its very nature produces small results initially and exponential results eventually. The curve is not linear, it is exponential, and exponential curves, in their early stages, appear nearly flat, appear to be producing almost nothing, but they are producing something, they are building, they are accumulating beneath the surface. And if you continue, if you sustain the effort through the flat stage, you eventually reach the inflection point. The point where the curve turns upward sharply, where accumulated effort suddenly becomes visible progress, where months of seemingly minimal results transform into rapid, obvious transformation. But if you quit during the flat stage, if you abandon effort before reaching the inflection point, you never experience the exponential growth. You never discover what was building beneath the surface. You never see the results that were days or weeks or months away. You simply conclude that the effort was not working, that the principles do not apply to you, that transformation is for other people, and you return to old patterns, and you never realize that you were closer to transformation than you knew, that continued effort would have produced the results you abandoned the effort to find. And here is the law. Time compounds correct action. Every day of disciplined effort builds on the previous day. Every action aligned with your aim reinforces the previous action. Every choice to take responsibility strengthens the previous choice. And this compounding produces results that seem sudden to observers, but were actually built gradually through sustained effort multiplied by time. But compounding requires time to work, requires patience, not passive patience, not waiting for circumstances to improve, but active patience, the patience that continues creating value while trusting that time will multiply that value, the patience that measures progress by consistency of action rather than immediate results, the patience that understands transformation occurs not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through quiet accumulation. And most people do not practice this kind of patience. They need immediate feedback, immediate confirmation that their effort is working, immediate evidence that transformation is occurring. And when that evidence is not present in the early stages, they panic. They question whether they are on the right path. They wonder whether they should try something different. And this doubt, this constant questioning, prevents the sustained focus required for compounding to work. Because compounding requires staying the course, continuing the same effective actions long enough for time to multiply them. And if you keep changing direction, if you keep starting over, time never has the opportunity to compound your effort. And so the practice is this: you stop measuring progress by immediate visible results and start measuring it by consistency of action. You ask not how much have my circumstances improved this month, but did I practice discipline every day this month? Did I maintain my aim? Did I take responsibility? Did I align my environment? Because if you practice the principles consistently, if you maintain the actions that serve your aim, the results will follow. Not when you want them, not as fast as you want them, but eventually, progressively, lawfully. Because the law of compounding is reliable. Time multiplies consistent action, and if you maintain consistency, if you give time the opportunity to work, transformation is not a hope, it is a mathematical certainty. And you protect yourself from impatience by understanding the stages of transformation. The first stage, which typically lasts 3 to 6 months, is the stage of minimal visible progress. You are building momentum, establishing habits, proving to yourself that you can maintain discipline, changing your self-image through accumulated evidence, but external circumstances change little, and this stage feels frustrating, feels like effort is not producing results, but effort is producing results, internal results. Results in thinking, in self-image, in capability, in understanding. And these internal results are the foundation for external results that will come later. But most people, not seeing external change, abandon effort during this stage, and they never reach the stages where external change becomes visible. The second stage, which typically lasts from 6 months to 2 years, is the stage of modest visible progress. Your circumstances begin to improve. Your income increases gradually. Your opportunities expand. Your confidence grows. Your capabilities strengthen, but the transformation is not yet dramatic. The progress, while real, is incremental. And this stage also tests patience, because the progress, while visible, does not match the vision you hold of complete transformation. The gap between current circumstances and desired circumstances, while smaller than it was, is still substantial. And many people quit during this stage. They see progress, but they conclude that the rate of progress is too slow, that at this pace, transformation will take too long, and they abandon consistent effort to pursue something that promises faster results, and they never discover that the rate of progress accelerates. That stage 2 leads to stage 3. And stage 3 is where everything changes. The third stage, which typically begins after 2 years and continues indefinitely, is the stage of exponential progress. The compounding becomes visible, results accelerate, transformation becomes obvious, opportunities multiply, capabilities expand rapidly, confidence becomes unshakable, and progress that seemed slow for 2 years suddenly seems fast. Not because you changed what you were doing, but because time finally multiplied your consistent action into visible exponential growth. And this is the stage most people never reach, not because they could not reach it, but because they quit during stage 1 or stage 2, because they could not tolerate the time required for compounding to reveal its power. But if you understand these stages, if you expect the slow beginning and trust the eventual acceleration, you will not quit. You will continue. You will practice discipline through stage 1 even though visible results are minimal. You will maintain effort through stage 2 even though progress seems incremental. And you will reach stage 3, where transformation becomes obvious, where effort that seemed insufficient for 2 years suddenly seems more than sufficient, where the life you have been building becomes the life you are living, and that transformation, achieved through patience, sustained through discipline, is permanent, is stable, is the natural result of working with natural law rather than demanding that natural law work according to your preferred timeline. And here is what makes this principle both encouraging and demanding. It is encouraging because it means you do not need to work impossibly hard. You do not need to produce immediate dramatic results. You simply need to act consistently and give time the opportunity to compound your action. But it is demanding because it requires you to continue when results are not yet visible, to persist when progress seems slow, to trust the process when immediate evidence suggests it is not working, and most people cannot do this. They need immediate validation, immediate proof, immediate transformation, and when they do not get it, they quit. And they never discover that transformation was building, that compounding was working, that time was multiplying their effort, and that continued patience would have produced the results impatience prevented. And so you must learn to measure differently, to evaluate based on process rather than immediate outcomes, to trust that correct action sustained over sufficient time must, by law, produce transformation. And that trust, that willingness to continue without immediate validation, is what separates those who transform from those who remain stuck. Because those who transform understand time. They know that transformation takes longer than impatience allows. They know that compounding requires patience, and they practice that patience not through passive waiting, but through active continuation, through doing what matters every day, while trusting that time will reveal what discipline has built. Time compounds correct action exponentially, and patience practiced through continuation produces transformation impatience prevents. And once you understand that time compounds correct action, that patience through continuation is essential, that transformation unfolds in stages rather than appearing instantly, you arrive at a moment that few people recognize when it occurs, but that marks the true turning point in the process of life change. And that moment is the inner transition, the point where effort gives way to confidence, where discipline transforms from something you practice consciously to something you are unconsciously, where the new patterns you have been forcing become the natural patterns you embody, where change shifts from something you are doing to something you are becoming. And this transition, subtle as it may be, is what makes transformation permanent rather than temporary, what makes change irreversible rather than fragile. Now, this inner transition does not announce itself. There is no specific day when you wake up transformed, no dramatic moment when everything suddenly feels different. The transition happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, through the accumulated weight of consistent practice over time, through months of maintaining discipline even when you did not feel like it, through months of taking responsibility even when blaming would have been easier, through months of honoring your aim even when immediate results were not visible, through months of aligning your environment even when old associations pulled you backward, through months of practicing patience even when impatience screamed for immediate evidence. And all of this practice, all of this sustained effort, it does something beneath your conscious awareness. It changes who you are. It rebuilds your identity. It transforms your self-image. It shifts your automatic responses. It rewires your habitual thinking. And one day, without fanfare, without announcement, you realize that you are different. And the difference shows itself in small ways at first. You notice that taking responsibility no longer feels like effort. It feels natural, automatic. You encounter a difficulty, and your first thought is not, "Why did this happen to me?" but "What can I do about this?" You face an obstacle, and you do not immediately consider quitting. You consider how to overcome it. You make a commitment to yourself, and you keep it without internal negotiation, without the struggle between what you said you would do and what you feel like doing. The commitment and the action align automatically, and this alignment, this absence of internal conflict, this is the evidence of transition, the evidence that change has moved from the level of doing to the level of being. And here is what I have observed. People who achieve this transition, who reach the point where new patterns become natural patterns, they describe it similarly. They say that at some point, the work stopped feeling like work, the discipline stopped requiring discipline, the responsibility stopped feeling like burden, not because the actions became easier, but because the identity shifted. They stopped being someone who is trying to change and became someone who has changed, someone for whom the new patterns are simply who they are. And that shift, that movement from trying to being, is what makes transformation permanent. Because you can only sustain effort for so long, only maintain discipline through willpower for a limited time, only force yourself to act differently for a finite period. But you can be different indefinitely. You can embody new patterns permanently. You can live according to a transformed identity for the rest of your life. Because identity does not require effort. Identity is effortless. It is simply who you are. And this transition from doing to being, from trying to embodying, it occurs when you have accumulated sufficient evidence. Evidence that you are not who you used to be. Evidence that the old patterns no longer define you. Evidence that the new patterns are not foreign but familiar. And this evidence comes only through sustained practice, through taking responsibility so many times that it becomes your default response, through maintaining discipline so consistently that it becomes automatic, through honoring your aim so regularly that it becomes part of your identity. And the time required for this accumulation varies. For some people, the transition happens after 6 months of consistent practice. For others, it takes a year. For others, 2 years. But the timing does not matter. What matters is that you continue practicing until the transition occurs, until the evidence accumulates to the point where your self-image updates, where your identity shifts, where who you are becoming becomes who you are. And you will recognize the transition when it happens, not because someone tells you, not because circumstances announce it, but because you notice internal changes. You notice that your thinking has shifted without conscious effort, that you naturally focus on possibilities rather than limitations, that you automatically take responsibility rather than assigning blame, that you instinctively maintain your aim rather than being pulled off course by distractions, that you habitually practice discipline rather than constantly choosing between discipline and comfort. And these shifts, these automatic patterns that now run without conscious direction, they are the evidence that transition has occurred, that you have crossed from the stage of doing to the stage of being, from transformation as effort to transformation as identity. And this transition produces something remarkable. It produces confidence that cannot be shaken by circumstances, not confidence in outcomes, not the arrogant belief that everything will work perfectly, but confidence in yourself, confidence that you can handle whatever occurs, that you can take responsibility regardless of difficulty, that you can maintain discipline regardless of circumstances, that you can persist regardless of obstacles, that you can continue regardless of how long transformation takes. And this confidence, this unshakable trust in your own capability, it comes from the evidence you have accumulated, the evidence of hundreds of moments when you honored commitments, when you took responsibility, when you maintained discipline, when you persisted despite resistance. And that evidence, stored as self-image, produces the kind of confidence that external achievements never create, because external achievements can be lost, but internal evidence of capability cannot be taken from you. And confidence based on evidence changes everything. Changes what you attempt, because now you are willing to pursue goals you would not have considered before, not because you are certain you will achieve them, but because you are certain you can handle the pursuit, can take responsibility for the results, can maintain discipline through the process, can persist through the difficulties. And that certainty about process removes the fear that prevents most attempts, the fear that you will quit when things get hard, the fear that you will blame when things go wrong, the fear that you will lose discipline when motivation fades. These fears disappear, not because the risks disappear, but because you have proven through sustained practice that you can handle the risks, and that proof produces the confidence to attempt. And confidence based on evidence also changes how you interpret difficulty. When obstacles appear, when setbacks occur, when progress slows or reverses, you do not interpret these events as evidence that you should quit. You interpret them as normal parts of the process, as challenges to overcome, rather than signals to abandon. And this interpretation, this reframing of difficulty from threat to challenge, it sustains persistence, it maintains effort. It prevents the discouragement that causes most people to quit. Because you know from accumulated evidence that you have overcome difficulties before, that taking responsibility worked before, that maintaining discipline through difficulty produced results before, and that knowledge, that confidence based on past evidence, supports present action even when present circumstances are difficult. And the inner transition also produces something most people never experience. It produces internal peace, not the peace of having achieved all your aims, not the peace of perfect circumstances, but the peace of alignment, the peace that comes when your actions match your values, when your behavior reflects your identity, when your life expresses who you actually are, rather than who conditioning told you to be. And this alignment, this coherence between internal and external, produces a quality of satisfaction that external achievement alone never provides. Because external achievement without internal alignment feels empty, feels like success that does not satisfy, like reaching a destination that turns out not to be where you wanted to go. But internal alignment, even in the midst of external challenge, produces satisfaction, produces the sense that you are living correctly, that you are building what matters, that your life reflects your conscious choices rather than unconscious conditioning. And so the inner transition is the goal. Not just changed circumstances, not just achieved aims, but transformed identity, because transformed identity produces changed circumstances automatically, produces achieved aims naturally, produces a life that reflects who you have become rather than who you were. And that life, built on transformed identity rather than forced behavior, is sustainable, is permanent, is immune to the reversion that afflicts people who change behavior without changing identity, because when behavior is forced, when it contradicts identity, it eventually reverts. But when behavior expresses identity, when it aligns with who you are, it continues, effortlessly, automatically, permanently. And the practice that produces this transition is the same practice we have discussed throughout. Take responsibility daily, maintain discipline consistently, honor your aim continuously, align your environment deliberately, practice patience through continuation, and continue all of this without wavering until the inner transition occurs, until effort becomes identity, until doing becomes being, until transformation shifts from something you are attempting to something you have accomplished. Not in circumstances alone, but in who you are, and who you are once transformed through sustained practice determines what you build, and what you build becomes the outward expression of the inner transformation that makes all external transformation permanent. The inner transition occurs when effort becomes identity and change shifts from doing to being, and so we arrive at the final understanding. The recognition that a life deliberately lived, a life consciously directed according to the principles we have discussed, is not what most people imagine. It is not dramatic, it is not chaotic, it is not characterized by constant excitement or perpetual intensity or endless striving toward the next achievement. A life deliberately lived is something far different. It is calm, it is directed, it is internally governed. It is characterized not by external drama, but by internal clarity, not by constant change, but by consistent direction, not by seeking validation from circumstances, but by maintaining alignment with values. And this life, this deliberately lived life, it is the natural result of understanding and applying the laws that govern human change, and it is available to anyone willing to practice those laws consistently until they become not just what you do, but who you are. Now, most people who seek to change their lives, they imagine that transformation will produce a life that looks dramatically different from everyone else's. They imagine constant achievement, constant recognition, constant evidence that they are exceptional. And when transformation occurs, when they have practiced the principles consistently enough to produce real change, they are sometimes surprised by how normal their life appears from the outside. They still wake up each morning. They still work. They still face difficulties. They still encounter obstacles. And from an external perspective, their life may not look radically different from lives being lived all around them. But from an internal perspective, everything is different, because the life is now directed, is now chosen, is now built according to principles they understand rather than patterns they absorbed unconsciously. And this internal difference, this shift from unconscious living to conscious directing, it produces a quality of experience that cannot be seen from outside, but is felt completely from within. It produces the sense of living on purpose, of moving in a direction you chose rather than drifting in a direction circumstances imposed, of building something that reflects your values rather than accepting something that reflects your conditioning. And this sense, this awareness that you are living deliberately, it creates satisfaction that external achievement alone never produces, because external achievement without internal direction feels empty, feels like success that does not satisfy, like reaching a destination that was never where you wanted to go. But internal direction, even when external achievement is modest, produces fulfillment, produces the sense that you are living correctly, that you are using your time well, that your life matters. And a life deliberately lived is characterized by several qualities that distinguish it from life lived by default. First, it is characterized by clarity. You know what you are building. You know why you are building it. You know what actions serve that building and what actions distract from it. And this clarity eliminates the confusion that plagues most people. The constant questioning of whether you are doing the right thing, the anxiety about whether your effort is productive, the worry that you are wasting time, these disappear, not because you have perfect knowledge, but because you have sufficient clarity, you have established an aim, you are taking responsibility, you are maintaining discipline, you are aligning your environment, and you are trusting that these practices, sustained over time, will produce the transformation you seek. And that trust, based on understanding law rather than hoping for luck, produces the calm that comes from knowing you are working with reliable principles. Second, a life deliberately lived is characterized by consistency, not the exhausting consistency of forcing yourself to do what you do not want to do, but the natural consistency of acting in alignment with who you have become. Your behavior is no longer divided, no longer split between what you think you should do and what you actually do, no longer characterized by cycles of intense effort followed by collapse. You do what you decided matters, every day, not through heroic willpower, but through established habit, through transformed identity, through alignment between action and being, and this consistency produces cumulative results, produces the compound effect that sporadic effort never achieves, produces transformation that builds progressively rather than starting and stopping repeatedly. Third, a life deliberately lived is characterized by responsibility, not the heavy burden of blaming yourself for everything, but the empowering practice of taking ownership of your response to everything. You no longer waste energy on resentment, on bitterness, on explaining why things went wrong. You focus that energy on what you can do now, on how you can respond, on what actions you can take. And this focus, this concentration on controllable factors, produces the sense of power that victims never experience. The sense that while you cannot control all circumstances, you can always control your response, and your response practiced consistently shapes circumstances over time, and circumstances shaped by responsible response reflect your direction rather than random chance. Fourth, a life deliberately lived is characterized by adaptation, not the rigid insistence that things must unfold exactly as planned, but the flexible recognition that plans must adjust to reality. You maintain your aim while adapting your approach. You honor your values while modifying your methods. You stay directed while remaining responsive to feedback. And this combination of firmness and flexibility, of commitment to destination, combined with willingness to adjust the path, produces progress that rigidity prevents. Because the direct path is rarely available, obstacles appear, circumstances shift, and if you cannot adapt, if you insist that only one approach is acceptable, you waste time pursuing methods that no longer work. But if you can adapt while maintaining direction, you find ways forward that rigid people never discover. And fifth, a life deliberately lived is characterized by peace. Not the peace of having everything you want, not the peace of perfect circumstances, but the peace of alignment, the peace that comes when what you value and what you do are the same. When your internal world and your external world reflect each other. When you are living according to principles you understand rather than patterns you absorbed unconsciously. And this peace, this internal coherence, it is the ultimate evidence that transformation is complete, that change has moved from doing to being, that you have become someone who lives deliberately, not through constant effort, but through natural expression of who you are. And here is what I want you to understand as we conclude. These principles are not theories. They are not philosophies. They are not motivational ideas meant to inspire temporary effort. They are laws, verified through observation, confirmed through application, proven through results. And they work. Not sometimes, not for fortunate people, always, for anyone who applies them. The law of cause and effect operates. Thinking shapes circumstances. Self-image governs performance. Definite aims organize effort. Responsibility enables control. Discipline converts intention to reality. Environment shapes thinking. Time compounds action. And sustained practice produces the inner transition that makes change permanent. These are reliable principles. And reliability means you can trust them, can build your life on them, can practice them with confidence that they will produce results proportional to the consistency and duration of your application. And so the question is not whether these principles work, the question is whether you will apply them, whether you will examine your thinking and change what needs changing, whether you will rebuild your self-image through accumulated evidence, whether you will establish a definite aim and honor it daily, whether you will accept full responsibility for your outcomes, whether you will practice discipline until it becomes automatic, whether you will align your environment deliberately, whether you will exercise patience through continuation, whether you will persist until the inner transition occurs, whether you will continue all of this until transformation is not just something you achieve but someone you became. And if you do this, if you commit to this path, if you practice these principles without wavering, your life will change. Not all at once, not perfectly, not without difficulty, but progressively, lawfully, permanently. Your circumstances will shift to reflect your changed thinking. Your opportunities will expand to match your expanded self-image. Your results will improve to correspond with your improved discipline. Your environment will align to support your aligned direction. And your experience of life will transform from something happening to you to something you are consciously creating. From drift to direction, from reaction to responsibility, from confusion to clarity, from division to alignment, from effort to identity. And that transformation, built on understanding and sustained through practice, will be permanent, will be yours, will be the evidence that you learned how life works and applied that knowledge until your life reflected that understanding. And a life deliberately lived, a life built on these principles, practiced consistently, honored daily, this is not reserved for the exceptional. It is available to you, right now, today, through the simple decision to begin, to examine your thinking, to rebuild your self-image, to establish your aim, to accept responsibility, to practice discipline, to align your environment, to exercise patience, to continue until transformation occurs. And transformation will occur, not when you demand it, but when you have practiced the causes long enough for the effects to manifest, when you have changed your thinking consistently enough for circumstances to reflect that change, when you have rebuilt your identity thoroughly enough for behavior to express that identity naturally, when the principles have been practiced long enough to transform effort into being and being into the deliberately lived life that was always possible but required understanding and application to become real. Life deliberately lived is calm, directed, and internally governed, and it emerges naturally when laws are understood and practiced, until transformation becomes permanent. Most people spend their entire lives trying to change. They make decisions, they set goals, they declare intentions, they promise themselves that this time will be different, that this time they will follow through, that this time they will become the person they know they are capable of being, and for a few days, sometimes a few weeks, they maintain this resolve. They act differently, they make better choices, they move in the direction they want to go, but then something happens. The initial enthusiasm fades, the motivation that felt so strong begins to weaken, the new behaviors start to feel difficult, and slowly, without quite realizing when or how it happened, they find themselves back where they started, doing what they have always done, living the life they wanted to change, and they wonder why. They wonder why change is so difficult, why effort does not produce lasting transformation, why they cannot seem to maintain the improvements they temporarily create. And the answer, which I have verified through decades of observation, is simple but profound. They focused on changing decisions, they focused on maintaining motivation, but they never changed their daily habits. And habits, not decisions, not motivation, not intentions, habits are what actually determine how you live, what you achieve, who you become. Now, I want to be very clear about what I mean by habits. I am not speaking only of the obvious habits, the morning routines you consciously practice, the regular activities you deliberately perform. I am speaking of something far more comprehensive. I am speaking of the automatic patterns that govern most of your day, the unconscious routines that run beneath your awareness, the repeated behaviors you perform without thinking about them, the habitual ways you respond to circumstances, the default patterns of thought that occupy your mind when you are not consciously directing it. These habits, these unconscious patterns, they are running your life, right now, today, this moment, and most people never examine them, never recognize that their life, whatever its current condition, is the accumulated result of habits they have been practicing. Most of those habits unconsciously, most of them inherited through conditioning. Most of them never chosen deliberately, but simply absorbed from environment and reinforced through repetition. And here is what makes this understanding so critical. Your habits are creating your future, not your intentions, not your goals, not your occasional decisions to do better. Your habits, the things you do every single day without thinking about them, the way you start your morning, the first thoughts you think, the actions you take before the demands of the day arrive, how you respond to difficulty, how you spend your unstructured time, what you consume, what you think about, what you practice. These daily patterns, repeated consistently, they are determining where your life is going, what you are building, who you are becoming. And if you do not like where your life is going, if you want different results, different circumstances, a different future, you must change your habits. Not your intentions, not your motivation, your actual daily habits, the patterns you practice when no one is watching, the routines you follow automatically, the behaviors you repeat without conscious decision. And most people never do this. They try to change their lives by changing decisions, by setting new goals, by declaring new intentions, but they continue practicing the same daily habits. They wake at the same time, they think the same thoughts, they follow the same routines, they respond to difficulty the same way, they spend their time the same way, they consume the same content, and they wonder why their life does not change. But the life cannot change while the habits remain the same, because life is the accumulated result of habits, and unchanged habits produce unchanged results, always, without exception. This is law, this is how it works, and it will continue working this way regardless of your intentions, regardless of your goals, regardless of your momentary bursts of motivation. The habits you practice daily are creating your life, and if you want a different life, you must practice different habits. And here is what most people do not understand about habits. They are not just actions, they are not just behaviors you repeat. Habits are expressions of identity. They are manifestations of who you believe yourself to be, and this is why changing habits is difficult. Because when you practice a habit long enough, it becomes part of your identity. It becomes what you do because it is who you are, and attempting to change the habit without changing the identity creates internal conflict, creates resistance, creates the feeling that you are pretending to be someone you are not, and most people cannot sustain that feeling, cannot tolerate that conflict, and so they revert. They return to the habits that match their current identity, and the life remains unchanged. But if you understand this, if you see that habits express identity and that changing your life requires changing your identity, and that identity changes through practicing new habits long enough for them to become who you are, then you have the key to permanent change, not temporary improvement that reverses, but lasting transformation that sustains, and that transformation comes through a specific process, a process of identifying the habits that are creating your current life, recognizing which of those habits serve your aims and which undermine them, deciding which habits to keep and which to replace, and then practicing the new habits consistently enough that they become automatic, that they become part of your identity, that they become what you do because they are who you are. And this process, this deliberate construction of new habits, it is not complicated, but it is demanding. It requires awareness. It requires examining your daily patterns rather than accepting them as inevitable. It requires recognizing that the life you are living is not random, is not the result of circumstances beyond your control, but is the lawful, predictable outcome of habits you have been practicing. Some of those habits consciously, most of them unconsciously, but all of them producing results, all of them shaping your life, all of them determining your future. And if the future those habits are creating is not the future you want, you have the power to change them. Not through motivation, not through willpower, but through understanding, through recognizing that habits can be changed, that new habits can be established, that consistent practice of new patterns creates new identity, and new identity produces new life. And so what I want to show you over the course of this extended explanation is not a list of habits you should practice, not a prescription of specific behaviors everyone should adopt, but a clear understanding of how habits work, how they form, why they persist, how they can be changed, and how changed habits, practiced consistently over time, produce the life change that decisions and motivation never sustain. Because once you understand the mechanism, once you see clearly how habits operate, you can apply that understanding to your specific circumstances. You can identify the habits that are serving you and strengthen them. You can identify the habits that are undermining you and replace them. And you can build, deliberately and systematically, the set of daily practices that will create the life you actually want, rather than continuing the habits that are creating a life you never consciously chose. And I want to emphasize something before we continue. This is not about perfection. This is not about eliminating every unproductive habit and replacing it with perfectly optimized behavior. This is about direction, about shifting the balance, about ensuring that more of your daily habits serve your aims than undermine them. Because you do not need perfect habits to change your life. You need sufficient habits. Habits that practice consistently move you in the direction you have chosen. Habits that compound over time into results that scattered effort never produces. Habits that build identity that supports the life you want, rather than identity that perpetuates the life you have. And these habits, once established, run automatically. They do not require constant motivation. They do not demand perpetual willpower. They operate beneath conscious awareness. And that is the power of habits. That is why they determine your life more than any other factor. Because they run continuously, they compound daily, they produce results whether you notice them or not, and those results accumulated over months and years become your circumstances, become your life. And so if you want to change your life, if you want lasting transformation rather than temporary improvement, if you want to become someone different rather than remain someone trying to act differently, you must change your habits. Your daily habits, the patterns you practice automatically, the routines that run without conscious thought, the behaviors you repeat whether you intend to or not. These are what determine your destiny. Not your goals, not your intentions, not your occasional decisions, your habits. The small actions repeated daily that seem insignificant in any given moment but compound over time into the life you are living. And that life, shaped by those habits, can be changed, can be transformed, can be rebuilt. Not through dramatic effort, not through heroic willpower, but through understanding how habits work and deliberately changing them. One habit at a time, one day at a time, until the new habits become as automatic as the old ones, until they become your identity, until they produce the life that intentions could never create, but consistent daily practice inevitably builds. Life is the sum of daily habits practiced consistently, and changed habits create changed lives. And once you understand that your life is determined by your daily habits rather than your intentions or motivation, the next question becomes obvious. And that question is, why do decisions and motivation fail? Why do people make firm decisions to change, feel genuinely motivated to act differently, commit sincerely to new behaviors, and then find themselves days or weeks later doing exactly what they always did? Why does the decision that felt so certain on Sunday evening dissolve by Wednesday afternoon? Why does the motivation that seemed so powerful in the moment fade to nothing when difficulty appears? And the answer, which becomes clear once you understand how habits operate, is this: decisions and motivation fail because they do not change habits. They attempt to override habits, to force new behavior despite unchanged patterns. And that override, that constant effort against established habit, it is exhausting. It cannot be sustained. And eventually, inevitably, the habit reasserts itself. The automatic pattern returns, and the life that was briefly different becomes the same again. Now, let me be very specific about what happens. Someone decides to change. They recognize that their current patterns are not serving them. They declare that starting tomorrow, or starting Monday, or starting the first of the month, they will do things differently. They will wake earlier. They will exercise. They will work on important projects. They will stop wasting time. They will be more disciplined. And this decision in the moment feels powerful, feels like the beginning of transformation. And for the first day or two, they maintain it. They override their habitual patterns through sheer willpower. They force themselves to wake when the alarm sounds instead of hitting snooze. They force themselves to exercise instead of making excuses. They force themselves to work instead of procrastinating. And this forced behavior produces a feeling of success, a sense that change is happening, that this time is different. But forced behavior is not sustainable, because forcing requires constant conscious effort, constant decision-making, constant willpower. And willpower is a limited resource. It depletes through use, and as it depletes as the day progresses, as stress accumulates, as fatigue sets in, the ability to override habitual patterns weakens. The new behavior requires more and more effort. The old behavior becomes more and more tempting. And eventually, often without conscious decision, the person reverts. They skip the exercise. They delay the important work. They return to the patterns that feel natural, that require no willpower, that run automatically. And when this happens, when they find themselves doing what they always did despite their decision to change, they interpret it as personal failure, as lack of discipline, as evidence that they cannot change. But this interpretation is wrong. They did not fail. The strategy failed. Because attempting to change life through decisions and motivation while leaving habits unchanged, this strategy cannot work. It violates how humans actually operate. And here is why. Your habits run automatically. They operate beneath conscious awareness. They do not require willpower to maintain. They are what you do when you are not consciously deciding what to do, and most of your day is spent in this automatic state. Most of your actions are not consciously chosen. They are habitually performed. You do not decide, each morning, whether to brush your teeth. You do not consciously choose which shoe to put on first. You do not deliberately select most of the thoughts you think. These happen automatically, according to patterns established through repetition, according to habits. And attempting to override these automatic patterns through conscious decision, through motivation, through willpower, this puts you in a constant battle against yourself, a battle between conscious intention and unconscious habit, and in this battle, habit almost always wins, not immediately, but eventually. Because habit does not deplete, habit does not require effort, habit simply runs, and it will continue running until it is replaced by a different habit. And this is what most people never understand. They think they need more motivation, more discipline, more willpower. They think if they could just maintain their decision longer, if they could just push through the difficulty, if they could just force the new behavior for enough days, eventually it would become easy. And this is partially true. If you could force the new behavior long enough, it would become habitual, it would become automatic, it would stop requiring willpower. But the problem is that forcing behavior for long enough to make it habitual requires more willpower than most people have, requires more motivation than can be sustained, and so they fail. Not because they lack capability, but because they are using the wrong method. They are trying to change life by changing decisions when they should be changing life by changing habits. And motivation, while it feels powerful in the moment, is even less reliable than decisions. Because motivation is emotional, it is a feeling, and feelings by their nature fluctuate. You feel motivated today, you feel ready to change, you feel capable of maintaining new behaviors. But tomorrow, circumstances shift, difficulty appears, fatigue sets in, and the motivation that felt so strong yesterday has evaporated. And without that motivational feeling, the new behavior feels impossible, feels like too much effort, feels like something you will start again tomorrow when motivation returns. And so you revert to old patterns. You wait for motivation to return. And sometimes it does, and you have another day or two of new behavior, but then it fades again, and the cycle continues. Motivation appears, new behavior is practiced, motivation fades, old behavior returns. The feeling of trying without the reality of changing. But habits are different from decisions and motivation. Habits do not require feeling motivated. Habits do not depend on conscious decision. Habits run regardless of how you feel. Regardless of whether you consciously choose them, they operate automatically, and this is both the problem and the solution. The problem is that your current habits, the ones creating the life you want to change, they are running automatically, creating results you do not want. But you cannot stop them through decision, cannot override them through motivation. They will continue operating until they are replaced. And replacement, true replacement, happens not through deciding to act differently, but through practicing different actions so consistently that the new pattern becomes as automatic as the old one, through repeating the new behavior enough times that it becomes habitual, that it runs without conscious effort, that it becomes what you do because it has become who you are. And this is why people who successfully change their lives do not rely on motivation, do not depend on constant decision-making. They change their habits. They identify the automatic patterns that are creating their current life. They select new patterns that would create the life they want, and they practice those new patterns daily, not when they feel motivated, not when they consciously decide to, but every single day, regardless of how they feel, regardless of whether they want to. They practice the new pattern until it becomes automatic, until it becomes a habit, until it runs without requiring willpower or motivation or decision. And once the new habit is established, once it operates automatically, it produces results just as reliably as the old habit did. But different results, better results, results that compound over time into transformed circumstances. And the difference between those who change and those who remain stuck is not that those who change have more willpower, not that they have more motivation, not that they are more disciplined by nature. The difference is that they understand the mechanism, they understand that change happens through changing habits, not through maintaining motivation, and so they invest their effort differently. They do not try to maintain high motivation, they establish daily practices. They do not try to make perfect decisions, they build reliable routines. They do not rely on willpower to override old patterns. They practice new patterns until they become automatic. And this approach, this habit-based approach, produces lasting change, because once habits are established, they sustain themselves. They do not require ongoing motivation, they simply operate. And their operation, continued day after day, produces the compounding results that motivation-based effort never achieves. And so the lesson is this: if you want to change your life, stop trying to change through decisions and motivation. These are unreliable, these will fail, not because you are weak, but because they are the wrong tools for the job. The right tool is habit change, identifying current habits, selecting new habits, practicing new habits consistently enough that they become automatic, and maintaining those new habits until they produce the identity shift that makes the new behavior feel natural rather than forced. This is the mechanism. This is how lasting change occurs, not through deciding to be different, not through feeling motivated to act differently, but through practicing different habits until those habits become who you are, until the new patterns run as automatically as the old ones did, until changed habits have created changed identity, and changed identity has created changed life. And this is encouraging, because it means you do not need to maintain motivation indefinitely. You do not need to make perfect decisions constantly. You do not need superhuman willpower. You need only to understand how habits work, and to practice new habits consistently for long enough that they become automatic. And that time period, while it varies by habit and by person, is measurable, is finite. Research suggests that most habits become automatic after 60 to 90 days of consistent practice, not perfect practice, consistent practice, and 90 days is manageable. 90 days of practicing a new pattern, of showing up regardless of motivation, of repeating the behavior until it becomes automatic. This is achievable. And these 90 days invested in establishing one or two new habits produce transformation that lasts, that sustains, that continues producing results long after the 90 days end, because the habit, once established, runs on its own, requires no ongoing motivation, produces ongoing results, and those results, compounded over months and years, create the changed life that decisions and motivation promised but could never deliver. Decisions fade and motivation fluctuates, but habits once established run automatically and produce lasting change. And once you understand that decisions and motivation fail while habits succeed, that temporary willpower cannot compete with automatic patterns, the next principle becomes essential. And it is this: habits are causes, life conditions are effects. This is not opinion, this is not motivational philosophy, this is observable law. The habits you practice daily create your circumstances, not occasionally, not unpredictably, lawfully, reliably, with the same certainty that planting seeds produces crops. And just as a farmer cannot plant corn and expect to harvest wheat, you cannot practice limiting habits and expect to create an expanding life. You cannot practice scattered habits and expect focused results. You cannot practice unconscious habits and expect deliberate outcomes. The habits are the cause, the life is the effect, and effects always, without exception, correspond to causes. Now, most people see their circumstances as causes rather than effects. They see their financial condition as the reason they cannot invest in development. They see their schedule as the reason they cannot exercise. They see their environment as the reason they cannot focus. They see their current situation as the cause of their habits. They believe that if circumstances were different, their habits would be different. That if they had more time, they would develop better productivity habits. That if they had a better environment, they would develop better focus habits. But this reverses cause and effect. This mistakes the result for the origin. Your circumstances are not causing your habits. Your habits are creating your circumstances. And here is how it works. Every habit you practice produces a result, small in any given day, but cumulative over time. If you have a habit of starting work without planning, that habit produces scattered effort, and scattered effort produces minimal results. And minimal results, repeated daily, produce circumstances of struggle, of working hard without progressing, of staying busy without building, not because circumstances are difficult, but because the habit of unplanned work creates those circumstances. If you have a habit of consuming entertainment before completing important work, that habit produces delayed progress, and delayed progress produces mounting pressure, and mounting pressure produces stress and rushed work and diminished quality. Not because the work is difficult, but because the habit of entertainment first creates those conditions. And most people never trace their circumstances back to habits. They see the struggle, they feel the pressure, they experience the stress, but they attribute these to external factors, to demanding bosses, to difficult projects, to insufficient time. And because they attribute effects to wrong causes, they never address the actual source. They try to change circumstances directly. They seek different jobs. They request more resources. They demand more time. But circumstances, being effects, conform to habits over time, and if the habits remain unchanged, the new circumstances eventually produce the same results. The new job becomes as stressful as the old one. The additional resources get wasted the same way the previous resources were. The extra time fills with the same unproductive patterns, because the habits, the actual causes, remain unchanged. And unchanged causes produce unchanged effects, regardless of superficial circumstantial changes. But when you understand that habits are causes, that your daily practices are creating your circumstances, everything shifts. You stop trying to change effects. You start changing causes. You stop blaming circumstances. You start examining habits. You stop waiting for external changes. You start practicing internal changes. And internal changes, sustained long enough, produce external changes. Not because circumstances decide to improve, but because you are creating different causes, and different causes must, by law, produce different effects. And this principle applies to every area of life. Your financial circumstances are effects. The causes are your daily financial habits, how you think about money, how you spend money, how you invest money, how you create value, how you serve others. These habits practiced daily create your financial reality. Not your wishes about money, not your goals regarding money, your actual daily habits involving money. If you have a habit of spending impulsively, that habit creates scarcity. If you have a habit of investing consistently, that habit creates accumulation. The circumstance of scarcity or abundance is the effect. The habit of spending or investing is the cause. And if you want different financial circumstances, you must change the financial habits that are creating current circumstances. Your physical condition is an effect. The causes are your daily physical habits. What you eat, when you eat, whether you move, how you sleep, how you manage stress. These habits, practiced daily, create your physical reality, not your intentions about health, not your knowledge about nutrition, your actual daily habits involving your body. If you have a habit of eating processed foods, that habit creates one condition. If you have a habit of eating whole foods, that habit creates a different condition. The circumstance of health or illness is the effect. The habit of nutrition is the cause, and if you want different physical circumstances, you must change the physical habits, creating current circumstances. Your relationships are effects. The causes are your daily relational habits, how you communicate, how you listen, how you respond to conflict, how you show appreciation, how you invest time. These habits, practiced daily, create your relational reality, not your desires for better relationships, not your complaints about current relationships, your actual daily habits within relationships. If you have a habit of distracted listening, that habit creates distance. If you have a habit of present attention, that habit creates connection. The circumstance of connection or isolation is the effect, the habit of attention is the cause, and if you want different relational circumstances, you must change the relational habits creating current circumstances. And your professional results are effects. The causes are your daily professional habits, how you start your workday, how you prioritize tasks, how you manage energy, how you develop skills, how you serve clients or customers. These habits, practiced daily, create your professional reality. Not your career aspirations, not your complaints about limited opportunities, your actual daily habits regarding work. If you have a habit of reactive work, responding to whatever is urgent, that habit creates chaos. If you have a habit of proactive work, addressing what is important, that habit creates progress. The circumstance of chaos or progress is the effect. The habit of prioritization is the cause, and if you want different professional circumstances, you must change the professional habits creating current circumstances. And this understanding, this recognition that habits create circumstances rather than circumstances creating habits, it is liberating. Because it means you are not at the mercy of circumstances, you are not trapped by current conditions, you are not limited by where you are starting. Because circumstances are effects, and effects can be changed by changing causes, and causes, your daily habits, are under your control, always, in every situation, regardless of external conditions. You can always change what you practice daily, can always modify your habitual patterns, can always choose to practice new habits that will create different circumstances, not immediately, not magically, but lawfully, progressively, as the new habits practiced consistently accumulate into new results that eventually manifest as changed circumstances. But most people never claim this power, never recognize that their habits are creating their circumstances. They remain focused on circumstances, remain trying to change effects without changing causes, remain waiting for external conditions to improve while continuing the internal habits that created unfavorable conditions. And this approach guarantees that nothing changes, that years pass with circumstances remaining essentially the same. That effort produces frustration rather than transformation, because you cannot change effects by manipulating effects. You can only change effects by changing causes. And causes in human life are habits, daily habits. The patterns you practice whether you think about them or not, the routines that run automatically, the behaviors you repeat until they become who you are. And so the practice is this: you examine your current circumstances honestly. You look at your financial condition, your physical condition, your relationships, your professional results, and you ask, what daily habits am I practicing that are creating these circumstances? Not what circumstances are preventing better habits, what habits are creating these circumstances, and you answer honestly, without defensiveness, without blame. You identify the specific daily patterns that are producing the results you are experiencing. The habit of checking email first thing that creates reactive days, the habit of skipping breakfast that creates energy crashes, the habit of distracted conversation that creates relational distance, the habit of working without breaks that creates diminishing returns. These habits, these daily practices, they are causes, and the circumstances you are experiencing are their effects. And once you identify the habits creating unwanted circumstances, you select new habits. Not vague improvements, specific practices, not be more productive, but plan the top 3 priorities each evening for the next day. Not eat better, but prepare breakfast the night before. Not improve relationships, but put phone away during dinner conversations. These specific habits, these concrete daily practices, they are the new causes you will create. And new causes, practiced consistently, must produce new effects, must create new circumstances, must transform the life that old habits created into the life new habits build. Habits are causes and circumstances are effects, and changed habits create changed lives, lawfully. And once you understand that habits are causes and circumstances are effects, that your daily practices create your life conditions lawfully and predictably, the next principle addresses why habits are so powerful and why they operate the way they do. And the principle is this: habits are not just behaviors you repeat. Habits are expressions of identity. They are manifestations of who you believe yourself to be. They are the visible evidence of your self-image. And this connection between habits and identity, between what you do and who you are, this is what makes habits so difficult to change through willpower alone, and so transformative when changed through the right method, because you are not just trying to do different things, you are becoming a different person, and becoming requires a different process than doing. Now, here is what most people do not understand. Every habit you practice reinforces an identity. Every action you repeat sends a signal to yourself about who you are. If you have a habit of hitting the snooze button, that habit reinforces the identity of someone who does not keep commitments to themselves. If you have a habit of exercising before work, that habit reinforces the identity of someone who values health and maintains discipline. If you have a habit of complaining about circumstances, that habit reinforces the identity of someone who sees themselves as a victim. If you have a habit of taking responsibility, that habit reinforces the identity of someone who has control over their direction. And these identities, these self-images built through repeated action, they determine what feels natural, what feels possible, what feels like you. And here is the mechanism. When you perform an action once, it has minimal impact on your identity. It is an isolated event, a single decision, a momentary choice. But when you repeat that action, when it becomes a pattern, when you do it again and again regardless of circumstances, it stops being just an action. It becomes evidence. Evidence of who you are, evidence of what kind of person you are. And that evidence accumulates. Each repetition adds to the proof. And eventually, the accumulated evidence becomes your self-image, becomes how you see yourself, becomes your identity. And once an action is part of your identity, once it reflects who you believe you are, it stops requiring willpower. It becomes automatic. It becomes what you do because it is who you are. And this is why habits are so powerful. They do not just produce external results through repeated action, they produce internal transformation through accumulated identity evidence. Every time you practice a habit, you are not just doing something, you are becoming someone. You are casting a vote for a particular type of person. And if you cast enough votes, if you repeat the action enough times, you become that person, not through declaration, not through affirmation, through practice, through the accumulated evidence of repeated behavior that proves to you who you actually are. And this works in both directions. Productive habits build productive identity. Unproductive habits build unproductive identity. If you repeatedly procrastinate, you are building the identity of a procrastinator. And once that identity is established, once you see yourself as someone who procrastinates, the behavior becomes harder to change. Because now you are not just trying to stop a behavior, you are trying to act contrary to your identity. And behavior that contradicts identity creates internal discomfort, creates resistance, creates the feeling that you are pretending to be someone you are not. And most people cannot sustain that feeling, cannot tolerate that contradiction, and so they revert to the behavior that matches their identity, even when that behavior produces unwanted results, because identity alignment feels more important than external results. But if you understand this mechanism, if you see that habits create identity, and identity determines what behaviors feel natural, you can use this knowledge deliberately. You can practice habits specifically to build the identity you want. You can select behaviors not just for their external results, but for the identity they reinforce. You can ask, before establishing a habit, what kind of person would this habit make me? What identity does this repeated behavior support? And if the identity is one you want, one that serves your aims, one that would make the life you want feel natural, you practice the habit, not just for what it produces externally, but for who it makes you internally. And this is the key to permanent habit change. You do not just try to do different things, you try to become a different person. You do not just attempt new behaviors, you use new behaviors to build new identity. And you do this by framing habits as identity statements. Not I want to exercise, but I am becoming someone who values health. Not I should read more, but I am becoming someone who develops their mind daily. Not I need to save money, but I am becoming someone who builds financial security. And these identity frames, these statements about who you are becoming rather than what you are doing, they shift the motivation. They make the behavior about identity rather than outcomes. And identity-based motivation is stronger than outcome-based motivation, because outcomes can fail, results can disappoint, but identity, once you commit to building it, persists regardless of immediate results. And here is how you practice this. You select the identity you want to build, not all at once, one identity at a time. I am becoming someone who maintains discipline, or I am becoming someone who creates value, or I am becoming someone who takes responsibility. And you select one small habit that provides evidence for that identity. For discipline, perhaps waking at a set time without snooze. For value creation, perhaps dedicating the first hour to important work. For responsibility, perhaps reviewing your day each evening and noting what you controlled. And you practice that habit daily, not for the external result, though results will come, but for the identity evidence, for the accumulated proof that you are the kind of person you declared you are becoming. And each time you practice the habit, you cast a vote for that identity. You add evidence. You strengthen the self-image. And over time, usually 60 to 90 days of consistent practice, the accumulated evidence reaches a threshold, a point where the new identity feels real, feels natural, feels like who you actually are. And when that happens, when the identity shifts, the habit stops requiring effort. It becomes automatic. It becomes what you do because it has become who you are. And automatic habits based on established identity, these produce lasting results. These sustain without willpower. These continue regardless of circumstances, because they are not behaviors you force. They are expressions of identity you embody. And this is why understanding the connection between habits and identity is so critical. Because if you try to change habits without changing identity, you are fighting yourself. You are trying to act like someone you do not believe you are, and that fight is exhausting, cannot be sustained. But if you change identity through accumulated habit evidence, behavior becomes natural, becomes aligned with who you are, and aligned behavior does not require force, does not deplete willpower, does not depend on motivation. It simply operates as the natural expression of identity established through consistent practice. And your current identity, the one producing your current habits and therefore your current life, it was built the same way, through repeated behavior, through accumulated evidence, through casting votes, through action about who you are. The difference is that your current identity was built largely unconsciously, through habits you absorbed rather than chose, through repetition of patterns you imitated rather than designed, through evidence you accumulated without awareness. But the mechanism was the same. Repeated behavior created identity, and identity created automatic habits, and automatic habits created circumstances, and circumstances became your life. But now you can use the mechanism consciously, deliberately. You can select the identity you want to build, choose habits that provide evidence for that identity, practice those habits consistently until the evidence accumulates into established self-image, and allow that established identity to produce automatic habits that create the life unconscious identity could never build. This is not quick, this is not easy, but this is reliable. This is how lasting change actually occurs. Not through forcing new behaviors against old identity, but through building new identity through consistent practice of new behaviors, through becoming someone different, and allowing that different person to naturally do different things, and allowing those different actions practiced automatically over time to create different circumstances, different results, different life. And so the practice is not just identifying better habits. The practice is identifying better identity, deciding who you want to become, and then selecting the habits that would provide evidence for that identity and practicing those habits daily, not perfectly, consistently, until the accumulated evidence transforms how you see yourself, until the new identity becomes established, until the habits become automatic expressions of who you are, and until those automatic habits create the life that forced behavior could attempt but never sustain. This is the mechanism. This is how habits actually change, not through willpower, through identity, not through doing, through becoming. Habits are expressions of identity, and lasting change requires becoming someone different, not just doing something different. And once you understand that habits express identity, that lasting change requires becoming someone different rather than just doing something different, the next principle addresses how to actually make this transformation occur, how to establish new habits so they become automatic, how to practice new patterns until they become identity, how to ensure that the habits you choose to develop actually develop rather than remaining good intentions that never materialize. And the answer involves three critical elements: discipline, environment, and consistency. And understanding each of these, understanding how they work together to transform conscious practice into unconscious habit, this is what allows you to actually change rather than merely intend to change. Now let me begin with discipline, and I need to clarify what discipline actually is because most people misunderstand it completely. Discipline is not punishment, it is not restriction, it is not forcing yourself to do unpleasant things through sheer willpower. Discipline is self-direction. It is the practice of directing your behavior according to your chosen aims rather than according to your momentary feelings. It is doing what you decided matters even when you do not feel like doing it. Not because you are forcing yourself, but because you have decided that your long-term transformation is more important than your short-term comfort, that the person you are becoming matters more than the momentary pleasure of avoiding effort. And this is not force, this is choice, conscious choice. The choice to honor your commitments to yourself, regardless of fluctuating feelings. And discipline, properly understood and practiced, is how you establish new habits during the period before they become automatic. During the 60 to 90 days when the new behavior still requires conscious effort, when it does not yet feel natural, when the old patterns still pull you backward. Discipline is what bridges the gap between decision and automaticity, between choosing a new habit and that habit running on its own. And this bridge is necessary, because new habits do not become automatic immediately. They become automatic through repetition. And repetition requires showing up, requires practicing the behavior, requires doing it even when you do not feel like it, even when motivation is absent, even when the old pattern seems easier, and showing up despite these feelings. This is discipline. But discipline is not constant force. Discipline is temporary effort that produces permanent ease. You practice discipline for 60 to 90 days. You show up consistently. You perform the new habit daily. And that disciplined practice transforms the behavior from conscious to unconscious, from effortful to automatic, from something you make yourself do to something you simply do. And once that transformation occurs, once the habit is automatic, discipline is no longer needed for that particular behavior. It runs on its own, and the discipline you were investing in that habit becomes available for establishing the next habit. And so discipline is not a permanent state of constant force. It is a temporary investment that produces permanent returns. Returns in the form of automatic habits that continue producing results long after the disciplined practice period ends. And here is how you practice discipline effectively. You do not try to discipline yourself in all areas simultaneously. You do not attempt to establish 10 new habits at once. You select 1 or 2 habits, the ones that would produce the greatest impact on your life, and you commit to practicing those habits daily for 90 days. And you protect those habits. You do them first thing in the morning before other demands arrive. You do them regardless of how you feel. You do them even when circumstances are difficult. You do them on holidays, on weekends, on days when you are tired or busy or discouraged. You simply do them, because you have decided that these 90 days of disciplined practice are worth the lifetime of automatic benefit that will follow. And the second critical element is environment. Your environment, the physical and social context in which you operate, it has enormous influence on whether habits establish or fail. Because environment shapes behavior, not through your conscious decision, but through cues, through triggers, through making certain behaviors easy and others difficult. And if your environment cues old habits, if it makes unproductive behaviors easy and productive behaviors difficult, your disciplined practice is fighting against environmental resistance, and that fight is exhausting. But if you align your environment with your new habits, if you make productive behaviors easy and unproductive behaviors difficult, the environment supports rather than resists, and supported habits establish much faster than resisted habits. And here is how environment works. Every habit has a cue, a trigger, something in your environment that prompts the behavior. If you have a habit of checking your phone first thing in the morning, the cue is probably the phone sitting on your nightstand. If you have a habit of snacking while watching television, the cue is probably the combination of sitting on the couch and turning on the TV. These environmental cues trigger habitual responses, and the responses happen automatically, without conscious decision. You see the phone, you pick it up, you sit on the couch, you get a snack. The cue triggers the behavior, and the behavior reinforces the habit, and the cycle continues. But you can use this mechanism deliberately. You can modify your environment to cue new habits and prevent old habits. If you want to establish a habit of reading before bed instead of scrolling on your phone, you remove the cue for the old habit and create a cue for the new one. You charge your phone in a different room. You place a book on your nightstand. Now the environmental cue leads to the new behavior rather than the old one. If you want to establish a habit of exercising in the morning, you lay out your exercise clothes the night before. You remove barriers. You make the new behavior easy, and making behaviors easy, removing friction between intention and action, this dramatically increases the likelihood that the behavior will occur. And the more frequently the behavior occurs, the faster it becomes habitual. And environment includes social environment, the people you spend time with, the conversations you engage in, the standards they demonstrate, because you absorb patterns from your social environment. If the people around you practice discipline, you absorb discipline. If they accept limitation, you absorb limitation. If they demonstrate productive habits, you develop productive habits. If they model unproductive patterns, you adopt unproductive patterns, not consciously, not deliberately, but through exposure, through osmosis, through the natural human tendency to align with the group. And this means that establishing new habits is easier when your social environment supports those habits. When the people around you practice similar patterns, when the standards you are exposed to align with the standards you are trying to build. And so you examine your social environment as part of habit establishment. You increase time with people who demonstrate the habits you want to develop. You decrease time with people who reinforce the habits you want to eliminate. Not because you judge them, but because their influence, whether they intend it or not, affects your patterns. And if you are investing 90 days in establishing a new habit, if you are practicing discipline to build new identity, you want your environment supporting rather than undermining that effort. And environmental alignment, both physical and social, makes the disciplined practice period much more effective, makes new habits establish faster, makes the transition from conscious practice to unconscious habit occur with less friction. And the third critical element is consistency, not perfection. Consistency, because habits are built through repetition, and repetition means showing up regularly, doing the behavior again and again, not perfectly, not without ever missing, but consistently enough that the pattern establishes, and research on habit formation shows that consistency matters more than perfection. That practicing a new habit 6 days out of 7 produces better results than practicing it perfectly for 14 days and then stopping for a week. Because the break, the interruption, it disrupts the pattern formation. It resets the process. But consistency, even imperfect consistency, builds momentum, accumulates evidence, strengthens the neural pathways that make the behavior automatic. And here is the rule that makes consistency achievable: never miss twice. If you practice your new habit for 20 days and then miss on day 21, you do not miss on day 22, you return immediately. Because missing once is human, is normal, is to be expected during the 90-day establishment period, but missing twice is the beginning of a pattern, is the start of the habit failing, and if you allow 2 consecutive misses, a third becomes likely, and a fourth, and soon you have stopped practicing altogether. But if you never miss twice, if you always return after a single miss, the habit remains intact, the momentum is preserved, and you continue building toward automaticity. And consistency also means same time, same context when possible. Because habits establish faster when they are tied to consistent cues. If you practice your new habit at different times each day, in different contexts, the environmental cues keep changing, and changing cues make pattern formation slower. But if you practice the habit at the same time, in the same place, in the same context, the environmental cues become associated with the behavior. And eventually, the cue alone triggers the behavior. You enter the context, and the habit runs automatically, without conscious decision. This is why morning habits are often easier to establish than habits scheduled for random times throughout the day. The morning context is consistent, the cue is reliable, and reliable cues produce reliable habits. And so these 3 elements, discipline, environment, and consistency, they work together. Discipline gets you to show up during the establishment period. Environment makes showing up easier by aligning cues and removing friction. Consistency through repetition builds the neural patterns that make the behavior automatic. And when all 3 operate together, when you practice discipline consistency in an aligned environment for 90 days, the habit establishes, the behavior becomes automatic. The new pattern becomes part of your identity, and what required effort for 90 days now runs effortlessly for years, producing results, building circumstances, creating the life that undisciplined, environmentally unsupported, inconsistent effort could never build. This is the mechanism. This is how habits actually establish. And understanding this mechanism, applying these principles deliberately, this is what transforms good intentions into lasting patterns that transform temporary effort into permanent change. Discipline bridges the gap between decision and automaticity, and aligned environment with consistency makes habits permanent. And so we arrive at the final understanding, the recognition that a life changed by daily design, a life transformed through deliberately chosen and consistently practiced habits, is not what most people imagine it to be. It is not dramatic. It is not characterized by constant intensity or perpetual striving or visible evidence of extraordinary discipline. A life changed by daily design is something far different. It is calm, it is ordered. It is characterized not by external drama, but by internal alignment. Not by constant change, but by steady direction. Not by visible struggle, but by invisible systems that operate automatically. And this life, this deliberately designed life built on consciously chosen habits practiced until they become unconscious patterns, it is the natural result of understanding and applying the principles we have discussed. And it is available to anyone willing to practice those principles consistently until new habits become new identity, and new identity produces new life. Now, most people who seek to change their lives through habits, they imagine that transformation will produce a life that looks obviously different. They imagine perfection, flawless execution, unbroken streaks of productive behavior, perfect adherence to optimal routines, and when they begin practicing new habits, when they attempt to establish better patterns, they become discouraged by imperfection, by the days when they miss a habit, by the moments when old patterns reassert themselves, by the gap between the ideal routine they imagined and the actual practice they maintain. And this discouragement, this focus on imperfection rather than direction, causes many people to abandon their efforts, to conclude that habit-based change does not work for them, that they lack the discipline required, that transformation is for other people. But this conclusion is based on a misunderstanding of what a changed life actually looks like. Because a life changed by daily design is not perfect, it is directional. It is not characterized by never missing a habit, it is characterized by never missing twice, by always returning after disruption, by maintaining direction despite imperfection. And this directional consistency, this pattern of practicing habits most days even when you cannot practice them all days, this is what produces transformation, not flawless execution, but sufficient consistency, not perfect adherence, but directional momentum, not elimination of all unproductive patterns, but replacement of enough unproductive patterns that the balance shifts, that the accumulated daily practice moves your life in the direction you have chosen rather than the direction unconscious conditioning was taking you. And what this looks like in practice is this: you have established a small set of core habits, perhaps 3 to 5 habits that you practice most mornings, habits that serve your most important aims, that build the identity you have chosen, that create the person you are becoming. And you practice these habits not perfectly, but consistently. You wake at your chosen time 5 or 6 days out of 7. You complete your morning routine most days. You spend the first hour on important work more often than not. You maintain the patterns that matter. And this consistency, this showing up most days, this practicing the habits that build the identity and create the life you want, this is sufficient. This produces transformation. Because transformation does not require perfection, it requires direction. And direction is maintained through consistent practice of core habits over extended time. And here is what happens when you maintain this directional consistency for months, for years. The habits become deeply automatic. They require no conscious effort, no willpower, no decision-making. They simply run. You wake at your chosen time without negotiation. You complete your routine without deliberation. You work on important projects without procrastination, not because you are forcing yourself, but because these patterns have become who you are. They are expressions of the identity you built through 90 days of disciplined practice, and that identity, once established, maintains the habits automatically. And the habits, running automatically, continue producing results, continue building circumstances, continue creating the life that matches the person you became through consistent practice. And this automated productivity, this systematic progress that occurs without constant conscious effort, this is what a changed life actually looks like. Not constant striving, but calm execution. Not visible struggle, but invisible systems. Not perpetual motivation, but automatic patterns that run whether you feel motivated or not. And these patterns, practiced daily over years, produce results that seem extraordinary to observers but feel natural to you. Because you are not doing extraordinary things, you are simply being the person your habits made you. And that person, that identity built through consistent practice, naturally produces behaviors that create circumstances that unconscious patterns could never build. And the quality of life this produces is different from what most people experience. It is characterized by several things. First, it is characterized by clarity. You know what you are building. You know what habits serve that building. You know what your mornings will include, what your days will prioritize, what your time will be invested in. And this clarity eliminates the anxiety that plagues most people, the constant questioning of whether you are doing the right thing, the worry that you are wasting time, the fear that you are not progressing. These disappear, not because you have achieved all your aims, but because you have established habits that serve your aims, and you trust that those habits, practiced consistently, will produce the outcomes you seek. And that trust, based on understanding how habits work rather than hoping for luck, produces the calm that comes from knowing you are working with reliable principles. Second, a life changed by daily design is characterized by energy, not the frantic energy of constant hustle, but the sustainable energy of aligned effort. When your habits align with your aims, when your daily practices serve your chosen identity, when what you do matches who you are becoming, there is no internal conflict, no division between what you think you should do and what you actually do, no exhausting battle between intention and behavior. The habits run smoothly, the energy flows naturally, and work that would exhaust someone fighting against their habits feels sustainable to someone whose habits support their aims, because the energy is not spent on willpower, not wasted on overriding automatic patterns. It is invested in productive action that flows from established identity. Third, a life changed by daily design is characterized by compounding. Because habits compound, small actions repeated daily produce results that seem insignificant in any given week, but remarkable over years. The habit of reading for 20 minutes daily produces 1 book per month, 12 books per year, 120 books in 10 years, and that accumulated knowledge, that continuous development, produces capability that sporadic reading could never build. The habit of investing a small percentage of income produces modest savings in the first year, but compounded over decades produces financial security that seemed impossible at the start. The habit of maintaining important relationships through regular contact produces deep connections that shallow interactions never create, and these compounding results that only appear through sustained, consistent practice over extended time, these are what transform life. Not through dramatic change, but through quiet accumulation. Fourth, a life changed by daily design is characterized by peace. Not the peace of having achieved everything, not the peace of perfect circumstances, but the peace of alignment. The peace that comes when your daily actions match your stated values, when your behavior reflects your chosen identity, when your life expresses who you actually are rather than who conditioning told you to be. And this alignment, this coherence between what you value and what you do, produces a quality of satisfaction that achievement without alignment never provides, because you are living according to principles you understand. Building the life you chose, becoming the person you decided to become. And that process, that daily practice of alignment, produces the sense of living correctly, regardless of external results. And fifth, a life changed by daily design is characterized by adaptability, because while your core habits remain consistent, you can adjust them as circumstances change, as you grow, as your aims evolve. You are not locked into rigid routines that cannot bend. You understand the principles, you know how habits work. You can modify them deliberately, can establish new habits when needed, can eliminate habits that no longer serve, can adapt your daily design to reflect your developing understanding of what you are building and who you are becoming. And this combination of consistency and core patterns combined with flexibility in adjusting those patterns, this produces a life that is both stable and responsive, both directed and adaptive. And so this is what I want you to understand as we conclude. Your life will be determined by your daily habits, not by your goals, not by your intentions, not by your occasional efforts, by your habits, the patterns you practice daily, the behaviors that run automatically, the routines that operate whether you think about them or not. And these habits, you can choose them, you can design them deliberately, you can establish them systematically, you can practice them until they become identity, and you can allow that identity to produce the life that unconscious conditioning could never create. This is not quick, this is not easy, but this is reliable. This is how lasting change actually occurs, through understanding how habits work, through selecting habits deliberately, through practicing them consistently until they become automatic, through building identity through accumulated evidence, through allowing established identity to produce automatic behaviors, and through trusting that automatic behaviors, sustained over time, create transformed circumstances that become transformed life. And that transformation, built on habits rather than motivation, on identity rather than willpower, on consistency rather than perfection, this is permanent, this is stable, this sustains, because it is not forced, it is natural, it is not maintained through constant effort. It runs automatically. It is not dependent on favorable circumstances. It operates regardless of conditions. And this is the power of habit-based change. This is why daily design produces results that decision-based change never achieves. And this is why your life will change when your habits change. And your habits will change when you understand them, select them, practice them, and become them. This is the path. This is the mechanism. And this is available to you right now, through the simple decision to design your days deliberately rather than accepting them unconsciously, to choose your habits consciously rather than inheriting them automatically, and to practice those chosen habits consistently until they become the person you are rather than the person you were. And that person, built through daily design, creates the life that daily drift could never build. Life changed by daily design is calm, ordered, and permanently transformed through habits practiced until they become identity,